That gnawing feeling when it seems like everyone else has their life mapped out with precision, while you find yourself standing in the supermarket aisle, wondering what you're even doing there. That feeling can be heavy. If that resonates with you, pause and take a slow breath. You're not broken, and you're certainly not behind. You are exactly where countless wise beings have stood before they uncovered something deeply meaningful. Remember, even the Buddha spent 6 long years wandering, searching, feeling utterly lost in the wilderness of his own questions. The greatest Zen masters remind us that don't know mind is not a flaw, but a doorway, an opening to truth and awakening. What if your confusion isn't a burden to be erased, but instead a small fracture where light manages to seep in? If this feels true for you, I invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from. Your city, your quiet corner, maybe even your car on a lunch break. There is something profoundly beautiful about realizing that while we are scattered across the world, each in different spaces and lives, we share the same thread of human uncertainty. In that recognition, we are less alone. So find a comfortable spot if you can. Wrap yourself in a soft blanket or rest into your favorite chair. This moment is not about repairing yourself in the next 3 hours. It is about discovering that the very place where you feel most lost could be the beginning of your truest and most authentic path. Together, we will begin exploring ancient remedies for modern restlessness. Not quick fixes, not temporary distractions, but enduring wisdom that has guided human hearts for more than 2,000 years. This is a journey of patience and gentle clarity, and perhaps in walking it, you will come to see that being lost is not a mistake at all. It might be the most honest and faithful place from which to truly begin. You've been carrying a weight that was never really yours to hold, the weight of believing that by now, at your age, with your experiences, after all you've endured, you should have perfect clarity about your direction, your purpose, your next step. But what if that entire assumption is built upon a cultural illusion, a framework of mythology that has been quietly shaping our expectations? What if the very notion that humans are supposed to have it all figured out is one of the most damaging lies our society repeats? Consider this deeply. When you were 5 years old, did anyone demand that you know what you wanted for dinner next Thursday? Of course not. And yet, somehow, we have allowed a strange pressure to form, an expectation that by the time we reach 25, 35, or 55, we should have not only the next step mapped, but the entire remainder of our existence neatly charted. The Buddha uncovered something revolutionary 2,500 years ago that directly challenges this illusion. He saw that it is not uncertainty that breaks us, but rather our endless grasping for certainty. He realized that the desire for solid ground in a world that is inherently fluid is precisely what creates the deepest layers of our suffering. Think about the last time you felt truly at peace. I would guess it wasn't during a moment when you had every single detail of your future planned, down to the last line. No, it was probably something much simpler. Watching the sky soften into a sunset, laughing with a friend until time itself seemed to disappear, sitting quietly and breathing without an agenda. That is because peace does not come from knowing exactly where you are going. Peace arises when you become comfortable with exactly where you are. Buddhism offers something radical, something that our achievement-obsessed culture struggles to comprehend: the teaching of radical acceptance. And to be clear, radical acceptance is not passivity. It is not resignation. It does not mean abandoning growth or progress. What it means is recognizing that this moment, exactly as it is, with confusion, with uncertainty, with not knowing, is already complete. Your uncertainty is not proof of failure. It is proof of honesty. It means you've stopped pretending to know things you don't. It means you've stopped performing a version of yourself that never felt authentic in the first place. Zen has a phrase for this state of being: don't know mind. And far from being ignorance, it is regarded as one of the most precious qualities a human being can cultivate. Don't know mind is the wisdom that emerges when we recognize the limits of what the individual mind can truly grasp about existence. When you are in this state, you are not straining to defend outdated beliefs about who you should be. You are not exhausting yourself by maintaining an image that never quite fit you anyway. Instead, you are free to respond to life as it actually unfolds, rather than clinging to how you thought it should unfold. In that freedom, something beautiful begins to appear: curiosity instead of judgment, openness instead of resistance, presence instead of distraction. And in presence, you suddenly notice the opportunities that would have remained invisible had you been frantically executing a rigid plan. But let's be honest, this is also why don't know mind feels threatening. We live in a culture that mistakes activity for progress, that confuses having a plan with having wisdom, that interprets certainty as strength. In such a culture, admitting you don't know where you're going feels dangerously close to admitting failure. And yet look back at your own life. Think of the greatest innovations, the most meaningful relationships, the unexpected moments that changed everything. How many of them went according to your plan? How many were born instead out of uncertainty, confusion, or what at the time felt like being completely lost? Steve Jobs once reflected on this truth when he said, "You can only connect the dots looking backward." The courses in computer science that once seemed random later became essential to creating the Macintosh. A calligraphy class he took purely for fun ended up revolutionizing digital typography. Even the devastating moment when he was fired from the very company he founded turned out to be the fertile ground for some of his most innovative work. What once looked like detours revealed themselves to be the very path. What once felt like being lost revealed itself as being guided. There is an old story that carries this wisdom in a simple image. A fisherman was drifting quietly down a river in his small boat, when, out of the morning mist, another vessel began rushing straight toward him. Alarmed, the fisherman shouted, "Move! You're going to crash into me." But the other boat kept surging closer, faster, until it slammed directly into his. The fisherman was consumed with fury. His peaceful morning on the river had been shattered, and he stood up, ready to unleash his anger on the reckless boater who had just collided with him. But then the mist cleared, and the truth revealed itself. The other boat was empty. It had simply broken loose from its mooring and was drifting aimlessly with the current. In that instant, the fisherman's anger dissolved. There was no one to blame, no enemy to fight. He quietly pushed the empty boat away and continued on his journey. The Taoist sage Chuang-Tzu, who first told this story, invites us to reflect. What if all the boats that crash into us in life are empty? What if the disruptions to our carefully laid plans, the people who fail to meet our expectations, and the unexpected turns that leave us disoriented? What if none of these were ever truly personal? What if feeling lost is not something happening to you, but something happening through you, a natural current of life moving you toward places you could never have designed or planned for yourself? Think of it this way: every tree in a forest faces obstacles. Beneath the soil lie rocks that block its roots. Above, taller trees may cast shadows that limit its light. Storms bend and batter its branches, yet the tree does not waste its energy raging at these challenges. It does not despair when it must grow around a boulder instead of piercing through it. The tree simply adapts. It twists, bends, stretches, and finds another path. Over time, those adaptations, the curves in its trunk, the unusual spread of its branches, become its unique beauty, its distinctive character. Your periods of uncertainty may be serving you in the same way. They are forcing you to grow in directions you would not have chosen. directions that ultimately make you more resilient, more creative, and more authentically yourself. This shift in perspective transforms everything. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this trying to show me?" Instead of resisting uncertainty, you grow curious about what it might be clearing space for. In Buddhism, what we label as confusion is often the mind's way of dissolving old patterns that no longer serve us. It is like a computer clearing its cache, an invisible reorganization happening beneath the surface. During those moments when nothing seems clear, the deepest restructuring is often underway. You've likely felt this in smaller ways. Think of trying to remember a name. The harder you grasp for it, the more it slips away. But then later, when your attention is elsewhere, the name surfaces effortlessly. That's because your mind was working in the background, beyond the reach of conscious effort. Your confusion may be serving a similar role. The answers you seek may already be forming, but they need the silence and spaciousness of not knowing in order to rise. You are not falling apart. You are falling together, just in a new way. But to live this truth requires a radical reorientation of how you measure your worth. Our culture insists that value comes from achievement, accumulation, and the ability to present an image of control. Buddhism whispers something far different. Your worth is not determined by how much you've figured out. It is revealed in your willingness to keep showing up, to keep breathing, to remain present, even when presence feels raw and uncomfortable. The most profound teachers across history, whether in monasteries, deserts, or forests, have shared this same thread, that human dignity is not rooted in perfection, but in sincerity. It is not born from certainty, but from courage, the courage to stay open, to stay awake, and to trust that even in the fog of confusion, life is quietly shaping you into the person you are meant to become. They are not the ones who mapped out their destiny early and never strayed from it. They are not the people who seem to glide through life untouched by uncertainty. Instead, they are the ones who learned how to rest inside ambiguity, how to uncover wisdom in the midst of confusion, and how to discover true strength in moments of deep vulnerability. The Dalai Lama was forced to flee his homeland as a young man, carrying the immense weight of displacement. Thich Nhat Hanh was exiled from Vietnam for his work toward peace. Pema Chodron endured a divorce that shattered the foundations of her conventional life. Their wisdom did not arise from bypassing loss or confusion. It blossomed precisely because they transformed those experiences into compassion and clarity. Your confusion, too, is not a mistake. It isn't a flaw in the system. It is a feature. It is your psyche's way of refusing to settle for shallow answers that do not honor the truth of your lived experience. It is your inner wisdom whispering, "We need to go deeper." Consider how audacious it would be to assume that your individual mind, with all its limited perspective, cultural conditioning, and biases, should be able to pin down the meaning and direction of an existence that belongs to an incomprehensibly vast and mysterious universe. When you see it this way, feeling lost becomes not a failure, but the only honest response. It is humility disguised as confusion. This does not mean abandoning plans or ceasing to set intentions. It means learning to hold them with a light touch. Plans become tools, not sacred contracts. You recognize them as guides, not absolute. You leave space for detours, for unexpected opportunities, and for the possibility that life itself may have a design more beautiful than the one you had imagined. Think of your plans like a GPS. When you're driving and the system says, "Recalculating route," you don't slam on the brakes and collapse into existential despair. You trust that a new path is being revealed, one that makes sense under current conditions. In the same way, your seasons of confusion might be life's way of saying, "Recalculating." Zen practice expresses this wisdom in a simple saying: don't seek the truth, just drop your opinions. Much of what we experience as being lost is not the absence of direction, but our clinging to rigid opinions about how life should unfold. When those opinions collide with reality, we suffer. But what if, instead of forcing reality to match your expectations, you became curious about what reality itself is offering you? What if your confusion is simply life whispering, pay attention, something new is trying to emerge? The Vietnamese Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, once taught that the greatest gift we can give others is our true presence. But presence is impossible when you are preoccupied with whether you are on the right path or endlessly rehearsing your next move. Strangely enough, feeling lost can make you more present than certainty ever could. When the future is unclear, you are compelled to pay closer attention to the only thing you have: this moment. And this moment is never empty. It always contains enough to work with. Always. Your breath is here. Your capacity to feel is here. Your ability to choose your next response is here. These are not small things. They are the elemental building blocks of every meaningful life ever lived. When you stop demanding that this moment be different, you finally begin to notice what it already holds. Maybe it's the warmth of the coffee in your hands, really tasted for the first time in months. Maybe it's the quiet rhythm of your breathing, reminding you that you are alive. Maybe it's the simple miracle of being here at all. Maybe it's the way the light spills gently across your room in the late afternoon. Maybe it's simply the miracle of your heart beating faithfully, without requiring any effort from you. These moments of presence are not consolation prizes for not having your life figured out. They are the prize. They are what all the striving, all the planning, all the achieving is meant to serve. So here it is, your permission slip, written across 25 centuries of Buddhist wisdom. You don't have to have it all figured out. You never did. You are allowed to be exactly where you are, feeling exactly what you're feeling, knowing exactly as much as you know, and no more. You are allowed to be human, beautifully, imperfectly, authentically human. And sometimes, being human means feeling like an empty boat, drifting down a river, not certain where the current is carrying you, but trusting that the river knows the way to the sea. The ancient teachers remind us again and again, confusion is not the absence of wisdom. It is often its very beginning. Questions are not failures to be ashamed of, but treasures that can hold more value than premature answers. And the courage to say, I don't know, is not weakness. It is the very first step toward discovering something real. So, take a breath. Feel your feet pressing against the ground. Notice that you are here, still breathing, still aware, still capable of this moment of simple presence. That is not a small thing. That is not nothing. That is everything. Beginner's mind as a natural remedy. There is something nearly magical in watching a child encounter the world for the very first time. Their first snowfall, their first glimpse of the endless ocean, or simply the way sunlight glitters inside a soap bubble. Their eyes grow wide, their entire body sharpens into alertness. And for those moments, they are completely consumed by wonder. There is no analysis, no comparison with past experiences, no mental filing system categorizing the moment into familiar boxes, just pure, unfiltered presence with what is. This state of being is what Zen Buddhism calls Shoshin, beginner's mind, and it might just be the most powerful antidote ever discovered for the feeling of being lost. The irony is striking. In a culture that worships expertise, credentials, and having the right answers, the ancient wisdom traditions point us towards something radically different. They suggest that the more we think we know, the less we are actually capable of seeing. Shunryu Suzuki, the Japanese Zen master who helped bring this teaching to the West, expressed it simply: in the beginner's mind, There are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. Sit with that for a moment. When you approach life as an expert, every new piece of information must pass through a web of existing categories. You know what to expect, what patterns to search for, what outcomes seem most likely. This can be useful, yes, but it can also blind you to the living reality right before your eyes. The expert's mind says, "I've seen this before." The beginner's mind asks, "What is this?" One narrows the horizon, the other opens it wide. This is why so many breakthrough discoveries do not emerge from the reigning authorities in a field, but from those who dare to approach the familiar with fresh eyes. Albert Einstein's theory of relativity was born partly from his willingness to question assumptions about time and space that physicists had accepted for centuries. He looked at the very foundations of existence with what we might now call beginner's mind. But here's what's especially important to remember in those moments when you feel lost. Beginner's mind doesn't require you to know where you're going. In fact, it functions best when you don't. When you are rooted in true beginner's mind, you are not trying to reach a specific destination. You're not measuring yourself against some imagined standard of progress. You're not anxiously asking whether you're ahead or behind. Instead, you are simply paying attention to what is actually here, what is actually happening, what is unfolding right now. This is a radically different way of moving through life than what most of us were taught. We grew up being told to set goals, make detailed plans, develop expertise, and eventually become authorities in our chosen fields. And while these things can be valuable, they also risk narrowing our vision until we see less and less of reality itself. The Buddha encountered this exact truth over 2,500 years ago. Before his awakening, he had become a master of the spiritual practices of his age. He could endure extreme austerities that would have destroyed most others. He had mastered meditation techniques of astonishing depth. By every measure, he was a spiritual expert. And yet, all that expertise still failed to bring him the peace and liberation he sought. It was only when he abandoned his attachment to expertise, when he sat beneath the Bodhi tree with a mind stripped bare, a mind that we might now call complete beginner's mind, that awakening became possible. Later, he expressed this insight in words that remain piercingly clear today. In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. What he was pointing to is how easily our mental categories, our accumulated knowledge, and our certainty about how things should be can become barriers to seeing how things actually are. The sky itself has no east or west. Those are human constructs. In the same way, the feeling of being lost may not be a real problem at all. It may simply be a mental overlay we impose upon the natural uncertainty of existence. When you bring beginner's mind to your confusion, everything shifts. You no longer interpret it as proof that you are broken or falling behind. Instead, you approach it with curiosity. You begin to ask, what is this experience actually like? How does it feel in my body? What thoughts accompany it? What happens if I don't rush to fix it? This way of relating to uncertainty is anything but passive. It demands presence. It calls for attention. It takes courage, but it also brings relief, because you are no longer fighting against your own experience. You are studying it, learning from it, letting it reveal itself in its own time. There is an old story that captures this beautifully. In ancient China, there was a master calligrapher whose skill was renowned throughout the land. Students traveled from distant provinces to study under him, and even emperors commissioned him to craft works for their palaces. One day, a young student approached him with a troubled heart. "Master," the student said, "I have practiced calligraphy for 10 years. I know every traditional form. I can write in multiple styles. My technique is flawless. And yet, when I look at your work, I feel as though I am still a beginner. How can this be? The master smiled gently and handed the student a brush. Show me, he said. Write the character for water. The student lifted the brush with steady hands and wrote the character flawlessly. Every stroke was in place, each proportion precise, and the form matched the classical rules perfectly. It was, by all conventional measures, without error. The master nodded in quiet approval, but then leaned in and gave a new instruction. Now, he said softly, write it again, but this time, forget everything you know about calligraphy. Forget the rules, forget the styles, forget the weight of your 10 years of practice. Instead, think only of water itself. Feel its fluidity, its ability to take on any shape. Sense its quiet strength, its way of carving through stone, not by force, but by patience and persistence. Let the character arise from your understanding of water, not from your knowledge of proper technique. The student froze for a moment. This went against everything he had trained himself to do. His body hesitated, his mind resisted, yet something in the master's request stirred his curiosity. He closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and let go of the thought of perfection. Then, with a gentleness he hadn't felt before, he wrote the character again. This time, it was different. The proportions still aligned, the strokes were still precise, but there was a vitality in them that had not been there before. The ink seemed to flow like an actual stream. The character no longer just represented water, it carried the spirit of water itself. The master smiled with a knowing calm. You see, he said, your expertise taught you how to write correctly. But beginner's mind allows you to write truthfully. Correctness is valuable, but truth is a lie. His words carried more than instruction. They revealed a principle that reached far beyond calligraphy. They spoke to the way beginner's mind can transform the experience of being lost. When you feel lost in life, it is often because your expertise, your familiar strategies, your accumulated knowledge, your well-worn formulas no longer apply. The approaches that once carried you forward suddenly fail to fit. This can be terrifying if you are deeply attached to being the expert of your own life. But it can also be profoundly liberating if you are willing to step into beginner's mind. For when you no longer know what you are doing, you are compelled to actually pay attention. You cannot rely on autopilot. You cannot simply copy what worked before. You must respond to each moment freshly, openly, and fully alive. Think about the first time you learned to ride a bicycle. You could have memorized all the theories about balance, momentum, and steering, but none of that knowledge could replace the lived reality of the ride itself. To actually stay upright, you had to feel every wobble, sense every shift, and make countless tiny adjustments in real time. You didn't think your way into balance. You discovered it, moment by moment, body to body, with the bicycle. Life, in its deeper currents, is no different. The seasons when you feel most lost are often the seasons when life is inviting you into new balance, new responsiveness, new ways of moving that cannot be learned from a manual or inherited from past experience. And yet, embracing this is difficult in our culture. We live in a time where not knowing is treated almost like a flaw, a deficiency to be corrected as quickly as possible. In the information age, ignorance feels like a moral failure. If you don't know the answer, you can search it instantly. If you can't solve a problem, an expert is waiting to tell you exactly what to do. This creates the illusion that all confusion should be instantly resolved. But the deepest human questions, those about meaning, love, death, freedom, authenticity, are not questions that can be answered in seconds or reduced to a search result. These questions require what Zen calls don't know mind. This is not ignorance, and it is not a lack of intelligence. Rather, it is a quality of openness, a willingness to rest in uncertainty, and a courage to allow understanding to emerge in its own time. It is the mind that can let go of its rigid categories and meet life directly without needing to reduce it to something already known. And it is often in those very moments of being lost, when all familiar maps dissolve, that don't know mind becomes not just a refuge, but the doorway into truth. The Korean Zen master Shongun often spoke about this state of don't know mind, not as an abstract idea, but as a living practice. He would test his students with questions that seemed impossible to answer. When they responded with clever logic or quoted Buddhist scriptures, he would ring a bell and simply say, "Don't know." This wasn't dismissal or rejection, it was redirection. He was guiding them away from the comfort of sounding wise and toward the rawness of genuine inquiry. He wanted them to taste a state of mind that values truth over cleverness, presence over performance. In this way, don't know mind is not a passive surrender. It is what we might call active not knowing, a state charged with alert curiosity rather than resignation. There is a subtle but crucial difference between being confused and being curious. Confusion resists the unknown and scrambles for answers. It clings to the discomfort of not understanding, grasping desperately for resolution. Curiosity, on the other hand, leans in. It opens itself to mystery, asks gentle questions, and allows discovery to unfold naturally. This is the essence of don't know mind. To feel it more directly, try a simple exercise. Look around your space and choose an object you see every day. A coffee cup, a plant on your desk, a book resting on the shelf. Something so ordinary that you barely notice it anymore. Now imagine you are encountering it for the very first time. Pretend you don't know what it's called, what it's for, or why it's there. Forget all labels and associations. Let your senses meet it, as if it had just appeared in the universe for the very first time. What do you actually see? Not the story about the object, not the function you've assigned it, but the direct experience. Notice the play of light on its surface, the way shadow shapes its form. Observe its texture, smooth, rough, polished, or soft. Imagine its weight, how it would feel if you lifted it. Notice how it sits in relation to the space around it. If you sustain this gaze, even for a moment, you'll feel something shift. The ordinary object suddenly becomes vivid, almost luminous. Details that were invisible in your habitual seeing become striking. What was once dull with familiarity becomes alive with wonder. This is the gift of beginner's mind. It does not add something new to life. It reveals what was hidden by the veil of familiarity. It makes the ordinary extraordinary. It makes the invisible visible. And just as you can practice this with a coffee cup or a houseplant, you can also bring this same quality of attention to your own feelings of being lost. Instead of immediately labeling them as problems, try investigating them as if you were encountering them for the very first time. Ask yourself, what does feel lost actually feel like in my body? Is it a tightening in the chest, a heaviness in the stomach, a fog pressing against the forehead? Does it carry a color, a weight, a temperature? What thoughts accompany this feeling? Not their content, but their texture. Are they racing or sluggish, sharp or hazy, repetitive or spacious? What tone do they carry? Anxious, searching, restless. By meeting the sensation of being lost with beginner's mind, you stop resisting it and begin studying it. And in this study, something remarkable happens. The feeling loosens its grip. It does not vanish, but it no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes more like weather shifting, passing, alive, but not defining who you are. Beginner's mind creates space around your experience. It allows you to hold confusion gently without trying to force it into resolution. And in that space, insight begins to breathe. Confusion itself may carry a kind of hidden wisdom. It may be your soul's way of telling you that your old maps no longer work, that the path you've been walking has reached its edge. It may be signaling that you're outgrowing certain limitations you never even knew confined you. This is why Zen masters treat confusion not as failure, but as doorway. The Buddha himself spoke of the mind's natural state as being like space vast, open, and ungraspable. He reminded us again and again, all formations are impermanent. Feelings come and go, certainties rise and dissolve. Even confusion, as heavy as it may feel, is not permanent. Seen with beginner's mind, it becomes less of a problem and more of a teacher, guiding you into new ways of seeing and being. Would you like me to continue and expand this into the next natural section, where we connect the Buddha's words on impermanence directly to the modern experience of restlessness? That would let the script flow seamlessly into the larger theme you're building. All formations arise and pass away, but awareness itself remains untouched. It is like vast space, clear, open, and boundless, able to hold everything without being disturbed by what passes through it. This pointing to the spacious nature of awareness is one of Buddhism's most profound gifts. It reminds us that our essential nature is not the confused person, scrambling for answers. Our essential nature is the awareness itself, the still and spacious field in which confusion arises and dissolves. Confusion may pass through you, but it is not you. When you rest in beginner's mind, you are resting in that spacious awareness. You are no longer identified with the drama of a particular story or state. Instead, you are simply present, curious about how life is moving through you in this moment. This shift doesn't make you passive, nor does it mean you stop caring about direction or meaning. What it does is free you from the tyranny of instead of pushing your life toward what you think should be needed, you begin responding to what is actually here, what is alive, what is asking for your attention right now. You move from a place of responsiveness rather than anxiety, from openness rather than control. You start to see that not knowing isn't a weakness, it's a doorway. It is not only acceptable, but necessary. Staying open to new possibilities is more valuable than clinging to old certainties, and curiosity becomes a more trustworthy guide than rigid expertise when you are navigating unknown terrain. The beauty of beginner's mind lies in its accessibility. It is never out of reach, no matter how much knowledge you've accumulated, no matter how much of an expert you've become in your field. You can always return to the freshness of this moment. You can pause and ask, what don't I know about this situation? What am I not seeing yet? What would it be like to meet this moment with complete openness? Far from diminishing your intelligence, these questions expand it. They stretch the edges of your understanding and create space for wisdom that knowledge alone cannot provide. So, the next time you feel lost, instead of treating it as a crisis, you might choose to see it as an invitation, an opening into beginner's mind. It is a chance to view your life with new eyes, to rediscover pieces of yourself and your world that routine and familiarity had hidden away. Feeling lost is not a failure. It is an opportunity to remember that not knowing is not a problem to be fixed, but a space to be explored. And within that space, possibilities appear, not the neat, calculated ones your expert mind predicts, but surprising ones that reveal themselves only when you surrender certainty. This is the wonder of a child seeing snow for the first time, eyes wide, heart open, breath caught in awe. That wonder is not gone. It waits patiently behind your need to appear competent, behind your fear of being wrong, behind your relentless desire to know. All you need to do is set those aside, even for a moment, and ask the simplest question: what is this? The answer may not come in words. It may come as presence, as wonder, as a deeper intimacy with life itself. And that answer might surprise you in ways your plans never could. This brings us naturally to an ancient story, one that has mapped the human journey of awakening for over 1,000 years, with more clarity than any modern psychology textbook. It is known as the 10 Bulls parable, a teaching that reveals why feeling lost is not a detour from the spiritual path, but often its very beginning. The story follows a young herder who loses his bull and sets out to find it, moving through 10 distinct stages. But this tale is not really about cattle. The bull represents your authentic self, that deep, unshakable essence that has always been present, but that easily becomes obscured by the noise of expectations, cultural conditioning, and the endless effort to become someone you are not. What makes this parable enduringly powerful is that it doesn't romanticize the path. It doesn't paint awakening as a clean, linear process. Instead, it acknowledges the struggle, the setbacks, the moments of despair, the wandering, and the unexpected breakthroughs. It captures both the frustration and the beauty of the journey back to yourself. It shows us that finding yourself is rarely neat, rarely straightforward, and almost never easy. The process is messy, non-linear, and often deeply frustrating. Yet within that difficulty lies its beauty. Every stage, even the confusion and the setbacks, serves a purpose in the greater unfolding of your awakening. Each misstep is not wasted time, but part of the path itself. With that in mind, let's begin with the first stage of this ancient journey, searching for the bull. This is where most people find themselves when they first sense that something essential is missing. On the outside, your life may look fine, even successful. By external standards, you may have achieved what others envy, and yet, inside, something feels hollow. Maybe you're walking a path that once made sense, but now feels suffocating, like clothes you've outgrown. Maybe you wake up each morning and hear the question echoing silently inside: is this really it? Is this really my life? In contemporary terms, this is what we call the quarter-life crisis, the midlife crisis, the post-graduation panic, or any moment when the structure you've built no longer matches the person you're becoming. At this stage, you know something is off, but you can't quite name it. You start searching without even knowing what you're searching for. You might devour self-help books, turn to therapy, experiment with meditation, or flirt with spiritual practices. You're like the herder in the parable, wandering through valleys and forests, calling out for his lost bull, but hearing only his own echo in reply. This stage can stretch on for months, even years, characterized by that persistent but vague sense of dislocation, the feeling that you're living someone else's life. On the surface, you may look like you have it together, but inwardly you know you're wearing a costume. Take Emma, for example, a marketing executive who spoke of this stage with piercing honesty. I had the corner office, the 6-figure salary, the admiration of my peers. But every morning before walking into the building, I'd sit in my car and feel dread. Not because my job was bad, it wasn't, but because it felt like a performance. I was wearing a mask. I had no idea who I actually was underneath it all. Her words echo the experience of countless seekers who find themselves successful but strangely unfulfilled. The natural remedy here isn't to double down on the search, but to honor the longing itself. That restlessness is not a defect. It is your authentic self calling out, refusing to be silenced, refusing to settle for a life too small for who you are becoming. Just as the bull calls to the herder from beyond the horizon, your deeper self is trying to get your attention, urging you to follow the unease rather than bury it. This leads to the second stage, finding the tracks. At some point, amidst the searching, you begin to notice patterns, subtle hints that point toward your authentic self. Perhaps you realize that you feel most alive when you're creating something, even though your career has no room for creativity. Perhaps you notice that certain conversations spark energy in you, while others leave you drained. Perhaps you recall what lit you up as a child, before practicality and expectations crowded out your natural joy. Sarah, a corporate lawyer, experienced this stage vividly. I noticed I kept making excuses to walk through the design department. I'd linger at their desks, watching what they created. At first, I told myself it was just curiosity, but eventually, I realized these were tracks. They were breadcrumbs leading me back to something I had loved, but abandoned years ago. Art. I let it go in college, because everyone said it wasn't practical, but those tracks never disappeared. They were waiting for me. The tracks may appear in recurring dreams, persistent interests that seem impractical, or fleeting moments where you feel like you're channeling a deeper, more real part of yourself. At first, they are faint, easy to dismiss as coincidence or fantasy, but as you learn to trust them, they reveal themselves as signposts leading you back to the bull, back to yourself. You might begin to notice subtle but persistent signs, how you always pause to read articles on certain topics, how specific environments draw you in, or how some activities leave you energized while others leave you drained. This stage is about becoming a detective of your own authenticity. You start tracking the difference between what nourishes you and what depletes you, what feels like expansion and what feels like contraction, what aligns with your deepest values versus what you do only out of duty or expectation. You begin listening closely to the quiet wisdom of your body, noticing how it relaxes and opens in certain situations while tightening and resisting in others. The natural remedy here is developing what we might call authentic awareness, the ability to recognize and honor these signals as guidance from your deeper self. For most people, these inner tracks have been overlooked, dismissed in favor of more practical or socially approved considerations. Yet the truth is that the tracks themselves are your compass. They are the footprints of your bull pressed into the soil of your daily life, waiting for you to follow. Then comes the breakthrough moment of the third stage, seeing the bull. Suddenly, almost without effort, you catch a glimpse of who you truly are beneath all the layers of conditioning. It might happen during meditation, while walking in nature, in the middle of a heartfelt conversation, or while doing something you love so much you forget yourself. In those moments, the fog of confusion lifts, and for a brief instant, you see yourself clearly. One person described it beautifully. I was helping my neighbor with her garden, and I suddenly realized I had been happy for 3 hours without even noticing. Not the forced kind of happiness, where you're trying to stay positive, but a natural contentment. My hands were in the soil, and I thought, this is me. This is who I am when I'm not trying to be anyone else. These moments of seeing can be grand and life-changing, or they can be quiet and ordinary, like the way you feel when you help someone solve a problem, when you explain something you're passionate about, or when you move your body in a way that feels utterly natural. Sometimes you recognize yourself in a character from a story or feel pierced by a piece of music that seems to sing your inner language back to you. But here is the crucial teaching of the parable. Seeing the bull is not the same as catching it. A glimpse of your authentic self does not automatically translate into a fully integrated daily life. In fact, the glimpse can often make things feel even more confusing, because now you know what you're missing. Many people get stuck here, becoming seekers who endlessly chase the next glimpse. They think awakening is about collecting peak experiences, moving from teacher to teacher, workshop to workshop, practice to practice, trying to recreate that single moment of recognition. The natural remedy in this stage is learning to trust what you've seen, even when you can't access it at will. That glimpse wasn't an illusion or an accident. It was a preview of who you are when you stop performing, defending, or bending yourself to fit the expectations of others. It was your bull revealing itself to you, showing that it is real, that it exists, and that it can be found. And this brings us to the fourth stage, catching the bull. Once you've glimpsed your authentic self, the real wrestling begins. Now the challenge is not just to see, but to hold on, to bring that truth into the messy reality of your daily existence. But actually, living from that place requires dismantling years, sometimes decades of conditioning. This is where the real work begins, and it is often the most demanding part of the entire journey. In the parable, the bull is wild, stubborn, and immensely strong. It doesn't want to be caught. Likewise, your authentic self might feel intimidating, even threatening, to the part of you that has been carefully constructing a safe identity through conformity and predictability. The self you've been presenting to the world may not easily make space for the deeper self that longs to emerge. Your family might struggle to recognize this new version of you. Your career might not accommodate the values that are surfacing. Your friendships and social circles may resist, sometimes subtly and sometimes directly, the changes you're making. This stage is marked by both inner and outer resistance. You know who you are, at least in flashes, but living from that truth feels risky and uncertain. The old self, however constraining, was familiar. It was predictable. The new self requires courage you're not sure you possess. You might find yourself unconsciously sabotaging your progress, slipping back into old habits, just when real transformation seems possible. The fear of the unknown is strong, and the pull of the familiar can feel almost magnetic. Mark, a software engineer who eventually realized he wanted to become a teacher, described this stage vividly. It wasn't just about changing careers. It was about acknowledging that everything I had built my identity around, being logical, practical, financially successful, wasn't actually me. My parents were bewildered. My friends thought I was having some sort of breakdown, and honestly, some days I wondered if they were right. I could see the bull, but every time I got close, something inside me panicked and let go. The natural remedy at this stage is what Buddhism calls right effort, a balance between extremes. It's the middle way between forcing radical change prematurely and giving up altogether. This means honoring your authentic impulses without trying to bulldoze your life overnight. It means acknowledging that while some changes can and should happen quickly, others require patience, strategy, and resilience. You're developing what might be called courageous patience, the ability to stay devoted to your truth while respecting the real-world complexities of change. Gradually, through persistence and compassion for yourself, you move into the fifth stage, taming the bull. At this point, you begin integrating your authentic self into the fabric of daily life. The wild, untamed bull slowly becomes more cooperative. The inner battle between who you are and who you've been pretending to be begins to soften. You are no longer in constant conflict with yourself, no longer trapped in the exhausting loop of having to choose between authenticity and expectation. This doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy or without struggle. What it means is that you are developing skill, the ability to navigate the tension between authenticity and practicality with more grace. You learn how to honor your values within the messy, imperfect circumstances of real life. You begin to discover that living authentically doesn't require tearing down your entire existence in one dramatic sweep. It requires gradually becoming more fully yourself, here and now, within the life you already inhabit. At this stage, you might still work in the same job, but your approach shifts. The way you show up is more aligned with your truth. You might remain in the same relationship, but you bring more honesty and openness to it. You find small but significant ways to express your authentic self within the structures you already occupy. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions to live genuinely and instead begin to carve out space for authenticity where you stand. Lisa, an accountant who rediscovered her passion for writing, embodied this stage beautifully. I didn't quit my job overnight, she explained, but I started writing for 30 minutes every morning before work. At first, it felt like nothing, a drop in the ocean, but over time, those small choices began to change everything. I felt more alive, more real, even in the middle of my day-to-day responsibilities. It wasn't about abandoning my life. It was about allowing my real self to live within it. I didn't quit my job immediately, but I began carving out sacred time for myself. An hour each morning before work devoted entirely to writing. It was a quiet rebellion against the life I had been living on autopilot, and slowly it began to shift my center of gravity. I started having more honest conversations with my partner, not just about day-to-day logistics, but about what truly mattered to me. I gave myself permission to decline social invitations that left me drained, and I leaned into activities that nourished my creativity and sense of aliveness. Each small choice seemed almost insignificant in the moment, but together they built momentum. Gradually, my outer life began to align with the inner reality of who I really was. The bull, once wild and unpredictable, still tested me at times, but we were learning to move in rhythm together, step by step. The natural remedy at this stage is developing what might be called integration skills, the art of weaving authenticity into the fabric of ordinary life without unraveling its essential structure. Integration requires patience, for not everything can change at once. It calls for creativity, for there are always ways to express truth, even within rigid circumstances. And it demands wisdom to discern when compromise is a healthy adaptation and when it becomes self-betrayal. The lesson here is clear. Authenticity isn't found in dramatic gestures or sweeping transformations. It is cultivated in consistent, deliberate choices that honor your truth over time, like drops of water carving a river through stone. From here, the journey flows into the sixth stage, riding the bull home, where a profound shift occurs. Effort gives way to ease. The tension between your authentic self and your conditioned self begins to dissolve. You are no longer straining to prove yourself or fighting to hold on to authenticity. It has taken root within you. Now, you are simply being yourself. This stage carries the unmistakable feeling of coming home, a return to a place you didn't even realize you had been missing. The peace that arises is not fragile, but grounded, steady, and alive. In this stage, decisions feel lighter because your inner compass has grown reliable and clear. You can sense, often without overthinking, whether something resonates with your values or pulls you away from them. External opinions lose their power over you. Intuition, once faint, becomes a trusted guide. The second guessing that once plagued you softens, and with it the anxiety about making the right choice. Others may notice this transformation before you do. They might remark on your calmness, your clarity, or your presence. It's not that life has become free of challenges, but you carry yourself differently, less reactive, less defensive, less entangled in the need to perform or prove. The endless inner negotiations that once consumed your energy between who you truly are and who you thought you should be, begin to quiet. You are no longer living in divided loyalty to two selves. There is only one current flowing, and you are in harmony with it. This is why your presence becomes palpable to others. They can feel that you are at peace with yourself. But here is what's so fascinating about the original parable. Even this stage, which feels so complete, is not the final destination. It is not the triumphant end of the journey. Instead, it serves as preparation for something deeper. The bull you worked so tirelessly to search for, find, catch, and tame begins to recede into the background. The parable points toward a realization more profound than simply being authentic. This leads us into the seventh stage, the bull forgotten, self alone. At this point, even the effort to maintain authenticity dissolves. You are no longer concerned with questions like, am I being true to myself? Because authenticity has ceased to be a separate project. It is simply the way of your being. The bull, once the central focus of your search, is no longer needed as a concept. You no longer relate to yourself as a seeker, trying to align with authenticity. Instead, you are simply living. This stage has very practical implications. You stop monitoring yourself, stop performing authenticity, stop rehearsing how to live truthfully. The vigilance softens, and in its place arises trust. Trust that when you are fully present, when you speak honestly and listen deeply, your actions will naturally align with what matters most. The self-consciousness about whether you're authentic enough dissolves because there is no longer a split within you to manage. There is a simplicity here that feels deeply restful. The internal committee, the voices debating each choice, analyzing every possibility, worrying about appearances quiet down. You no longer analyze life as much as you inhabit it. Decisions come from clarity rather than calculation. It is like the difference between thinking about riding a bicycle and simply riding it. The mechanics of living, once so effortful and self-monitored, become unconscious and natural, like breathing or walking. This effortless presence ushers in the eighth stage, both bull and self forgotten. Here, the parable takes a radical turn. What began as a search for authenticity now reveals its ultimate paradox. There was never really a self to lose or a bull to find. Even the sense of being a seeker dissolves. You begin to realize that the very struggle to discover yourself was built upon the assumption that something essential had been missing, when in truth, nothing was ever lost. In psychological terms, this stage represents the loosening of the ego's relentless demand for a special identity. The need to define yourself as this or that, to prove your worth, to secure a fixed place in the world, begins to dissolve. What emerges is not emptiness in the bleak sense, but emptiness in the liberating sense. Freedom from clinging to a rigid idea of who you are supposed to be. You no longer carry the burden of self-definition. Instead, you flow like water, effortlessly assuming the shape of whatever container life pours you into, while never losing your essence. You are both everywhere and nowhere in particular, free to move with life rather than against it. From here, the path opens into the ninth stage, returning to the source. In this stage, you realize that what you had been searching for all along was never absent. The journey of seeking, struggling, taming, and forgetting was necessary, yet it ends in the recognition that your essential nature has always been present, quietly shining beneath the layers of conditioning and strive. What once felt like a desperate attempt to find yourself now reveals itself as a homecoming to what you have always been. People often describe this stage as a profound sense of full circle. There is a return to the childlike innocence you once carried before the world told you who you had to be. But unlike childhood, This innocence is no longer naive. It is illuminated by experience, enriched by suffering, and deepened by understanding. You know now what you didn't know then, that you can trust life, that you can rest in being, that nothing essential can ever truly be lost. Gratitude becomes the defining quality of this stage. You see your confusion, your pain, your detours, not as failures but as sacred stepping stones that led you back to yourself. Even the times you felt most lost now reveal themselves as indispensable parts of the path. Finally, the parable culminates in the 10th stage, entering the marketplace with helping hands. The journey does not end in some mountaintop transcendence or retreat from the world. Instead, it circles back into the ordinariness of daily life. But now, everything is different. You return to your work, your relationships, your responsibilities, not from a place of compulsion, anxiety, or performance, but from freedom, clarity, and love. Ordinary tasks become infused with sacred presence. You chop wood and carry water, as the Zen saying goes, but now you do so with joy and awareness. Most importantly, you become a quiet source of healing for others, not because you set out to be a teacher, not because you preach or give advice, but because your way of being itself carries a fragrance of authenticity and peace. People sense something in you that is real, something they have been searching for themselves. Your presence gives them hope, reminding them of their own wholeness. In this way, the journey becomes complete, not when you find yourself in isolation, but when your very existence becomes a blessing to the world. One of the most comforting aspects of the 10 Bulls parable is the way it reminds us that progress is never linear. Unlike the tidy milestones we're taught to measure our lives by, the path of inner growth rarely unfolds in a straight, predictable line. Instead, it bends, circles, and loops back on itself. The parable captures this nonlinear rhythm of development in a way that brings deep relief to anyone who has ever felt like they were regressing, standing still, or somehow failing. You don't graduate from one stage, close the book, and never revisit it again. Life has a way of returning us to these stages again and again, but each time we come back, we're standing on a deeper ground of understanding. You might discover your authentic self in one part of your life while still searching for it in another. Perhaps you've caught the bull in your career, learning to work with authenticity and presence, yet in your relationships, you're still searching for footprints. One day, you might experience moments of luminous clarity where everything feels aligned, and the very next day, find yourself wandering in confusion, as though you've lost the trail altogether. You may feel as if you've integrated your authentic self beautifully, only for an unexpected life change to scatter your certainty and cast you back into searching mode. None of this is failure. It is, in fact, the very way human consciousness develops, not in straight lines, but in spirals, revisiting familiar landscapes with new depth, new compassion, and new skill. Each return is not a setback, but an opportunity for greater wisdom. The searching of a 20-year-old carries a different texture than the searching of a 50-year-old. The uncertainty may feel familiar, but the perspective, patience, and insight you bring to it are far richer. This is what makes the parable so therapeutic. It validates every part of the journey, where culture often pressures us to always move forward in measurable achievements. This teaching reassures us that circling back is natural, necessary, and profoundly healing. Every stage carries its own medicine. Feeling lost is not evidence of brokenness, but the very beginning of awakening. Confusion about direction is not a flaw, but the first glimmer of tracks in the forest. The struggle to integrate your authentic self into daily life is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It is the essence of catching and taming the bull. Each phase has its own gift, its own indispensable teaching. Searching honors your longing and awakens trust. that something real is calling you. Finding tracks cultivates the awareness to recognize what is genuinely yours. Seeing the bull develops faith in your own direct experience. Catching it strengthens the courage to live in alignment. Taming it teaches integration and skillful means. The later stages open the heart into surrender, wisdom, and compassionate action. When you begin to understand where you are on this path, relief often follows. You are not broken, behind, or defective for not having life neatly figured out. You are right where you need to be, learning what only this stage can teach you, developing the capacities that will become essential in later stages. Your confusion isn't a glitch in the system. It is part of the system itself. In truth, confusion is often the signal that you are ready to expand into a larger sense of self, that the old identity you've been carrying has become too small for who you are becoming. This discomfort is not punishment. It is preparation. It is life clearing space for something new to emerge. The uncertainty you feel is not the absence of a path, but the threshold of transformation. So when you find yourself unsure of who you are or where you are going, remember the young herder at the beginning of the story. He does not yet know where the bull is, but he trusts in its existence. That trust is enough to begin, and the same is true for you. Your not knowing is not the end of the road, but the first step in a deeper unfolding. He's willing to begin the journey even without a map, without guarantees, even when others dismiss him as reckless for leaving the safety of the village. That simple willingness to step forward into the unknown, to seek without certainty, is already a profound form of practice. It is the courage to live inside the question rather than clinging desperately to an answer. It is the humility to admit that you don't yet know everything about yourself, paired with the faith that the journey of discovery is inherently worthwhile. The bull, your authentic self, is there waiting to be found. The path may twist and stretch far longer than you imagined. It may lead you through valleys of doubt and peaks of revelation, yet every step you take brings you closer to home. Not to some distant foreign place you've never known, but to the essence of who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning, the weight of expectations, and the illusions about who you thought you should be. The 10 Bulls parable whispers a truth that softens the struggle. Getting lost is not a mistake, not a detour away from your spiritual life. It is the path itself. Each stage, whether bright with clarity or tangled in confusion, is precisely where you need to be in order to uncover what has always been waiting for you. The authentic self, like the bull, never abandoned you. It has been quietly, patiently present all along, waiting for you to stop searching outside and finally return to your own heart. And so, we arrive at another layer of the teaching, the seeds of your experience. Have you ever paused to wonder why certain situations seem to repeat in your life? Why familiar patterns echo across different chapters? Similar relationships, recurring conflicts, the same themes arising even after you swear you've started fresh. Buddhism offers a compassionate lens for this mystery, inviting you to see these repetitions not as punishment, not as evidence of failure, but as seeds planted long ago that are now ripening in your present experience. This is the teaching of karma, not the oversimplified slogan of what goes around comes around, used so casually to explain everything from a stubbed toe to a natural disaster, but something subtler, more intelligent, and infinitely more hopeful. Karma in its original sense simply means action, but action is not limited to the movements of your body. It includes the subtle habits of thought, the emotional patterns, the quiet stories you repeat to yourself. These accumulated actions weave the conditions that shape what you encounter today. Think of it as the most refined psychology, one that traces the delicate threads between cause and effect across the landscape of an entire human life. Seen this way, your present struggles begin to make sense in a new That tendency to shrink in moments that matter, doubting yourself just as opportunity knocks. Perhaps it is the fruit of seeds planted long ago, when someone's harsh criticism took root as truth in your young mind. That pattern of attracting relationships where you are always the rescuer, maybe it grows from the seed of believing your worth lies in being needed. That painful habit of sabotaging yourself just as success begins to blossom. It might be the bloom of an old seed that once learned success was dangerous, that shining too brightly invited risk. That anxiety that shows up before important presentations. Instead of seeing it as proof that you're broken or incapable, you can recognize it as a signal pointing back to an old seed perhaps planted when speaking up once led to embarrassment or criticism. The body remembers, and the mind, in its wisdom, creates protective armor. The trouble is that the armor designed for a younger version of you is still being worn by the adult you. This is why the Buddhist understanding of karma is so healing. It teaches that your struggles are not evidence of personal failure, but the natural unfolding of conditions. Like the flower bound by cloth, you are not flawed. You are simply living out the momentum of patterns that once kept you safe, but now need loosening. And here's the hopeful part. Just as the gardener removed the cloth with patience and care, you too can begin to untangle these patterns. Slowly, gently, without tearing at the roots of who you are. You don't have to rip them out in one dramatic act of willpower. You only need to bring awareness, compassion, and persistence. Over time, the old bindings loosen, and your life begins to expand in ways that feel both natural and astonishing. When you start to see patterns not as prisons but as teachers, something profound shifts. That anxious voice before a presentation becomes a teacher in courage. That perfectionism becomes a teacher in letting go. That self-sabotage becomes a teacher in worthiness. Each recurring struggle is not here to punish you, but to guide you back to freedom. And here's where the link to the 10 bulls becomes clear again. The early stages of searching and finding tracks are very much about recognizing these karmic bindings, the ways your past has shaped your present. The later stages, catching and taming the bull, mirror the patient and courageous work of loosening them. Integration and forgetting the bull point to what happens when those bindings no longer define you. This is where the real power of karmic understanding emerges. When you see your patterns through the lens of causes and conditions, you stop treating them as permanent verdicts on your character and start relating to them as passing weather shaped by past climates. You realize, I am not my procrastination. I am not my worry. I am not my inability to say no. These are simply karmic seeds that sprouted because of the soil they were planted in. And just as conditions gave rise to them, new conditions can transform them. This perspective is profoundly liberating because it removes the weight of fatalism. You're not doomed to keep repeating the same cycles forever. Patterns are not destiny. They are invitations. They are teachers pointing to what in you still longs for care, what in you still aches for freedom. And the way forward isn't force, but awareness. When you see your patterns clearly, without shaming, without pushing them away, you create the space to respond differently. That space is the fertile ground where new seeds can be planted. Seeds of patience where urgency once ruled. Seeds of healthy boundaries where overcommitment once drained you. Seeds of self-trust where worry once stole your peace. This is why the Buddha described karma not as punishment, but as potential. Each moment of awareness is a moment of planting. Each choice to respond differently waters a new seed. Over time, with patience and care, your inner garden shifts. What once felt like a tangle of weeds becomes a field where wisdom, compassion, and authenticity can grow. This recognition can be both humbling and empowering in profound ways. Humbling because it dissolves the illusion that you are a fixed, isolated personality moving through life in complete independence. What you call you is, in fact, the unfolding of countless causes and conditions: your upbringing, your culture, your relationships, your joys and traumas, even the subtle impressions left by a glance, a word, or a silence years ago. Much of what you thought was an unchangeable trait of yours is revealed as a natural outcome of these past influences. This humbling awareness loosens the grip of self-blame. You begin to see that your patterns aren't moral failures, but the blossoming of seeds planted in specific soils. And yet, alongside that humility, there is a deep empowerment. Because while you may not have chosen the original seeds, you do participate in planting new ones. Each moment is fertile ground, an opportunity to shift the direction of growth. Every conscious act, whether small or large, sends ripples into the world around you. When you choose patience in a heated moment, that choice doesn't just shape your own inner landscape, it influences how the other person feels and how they, in turn, treat the next person they encounter. When you practice kindness in a place of judgment, that kindness echoes in ways you may never see. When you offer authenticity instead of a mask, you give permission for others to do the same, and the pattern begins to spread beyond you. In this way, working with karmic seeds becomes not only a personal practice, but also a collective one. Your transformation becomes part of the world's transformation. The simple act of pausing before reacting, of choosing awareness over habit, of responding with compassion rather than fear. These are not minor gestures, they are seeds with the power to alter the field of human experience. The Buddha often compared this to a single lamp, lighting countless others. Your choice to plant mindful seeds doesn't just brighten your own path, it has the potential to illuminate the paths of many. When you choose patience over irritation with someone who tests your limits, you are not only altering the quality of your own inner state, you are also planting seeds of patience that may ripple outward into how that person interacts with others. When you choose honesty instead of falling into the trap of people-pleasing, you are quietly creating an environment where authenticity becomes safer, where others feel the unspoken permission to be genuine as well. And when you choose self-compassion rather than tearing yourself down with criticism, you are modeling an entirely different way of being, one that shows others it is possible to hold themselves with gentleness. None of this means that you are responsible for carrying the weight of fixing everyone else, nor does it mean you should abandon your own well-being for the sake of others. What it does mean is that the work you do within yourself is never merely private or contained. Your healing contributes to the collective healing in ways both visible and invisible, shaping the shared field of human experience. There is a particular freedom that comes from understanding karma in this light. You no longer need your past to have been different in order to be okay now. You no longer need to stay bound in endless loops of blame toward your parents, your culture, or your circumstances for shaping the patterns you wrestle with today. This is not because those influences were insignificant or unreal. They were deeply formative, but blame holds you in the gravity of the past, while understanding gives you the freedom to work skillfully with the present. Likewise, you no longer need to cling to the illusion of having perfect control over your future. You can plant seeds consciously, nurture them with care, and act in alignment with your values, but you cannot dictate every condition that influences their growth. Sometimes seeds you've tended with all your heart do not spread, and sometimes out of nowhere, wild wilds bloom from seeds you never realized you had sown. This is the humbling mystery of how transformation unfolds in human life. The practice then becomes less about guaranteeing results and more about showing up, moment after moment, as consciously and wholeheartedly as you can. It becomes about making choices that honor your deepest values, trusting that this way of living will inevitably create beneficial conditions over time, not because life promises you specific outcomes, but because you are shifting from being unconsciously carried along by inherited patterns to consciously participating in the ongoing creation of your path. This transition from unconscious habit to conscious collaboration with life may be the most practical and empowering gift of understanding karmic patterns. It does not mean your challenges vanish. What it means is that they become workable, raw material for your growth, rather than burdens that prove you are failing. Even the feeling of being lost begins to appear in a different light. What if your confusion is not a mistake or a sign that something is broken, but instead an indication that rigid patterns of certainty are dissolving, making space for new ways of being? What if the unsettling experience of not knowing who you are is your psyche's quiet refusal to keep shrinking into outdated self-concepts that no longer fit? Through this lens, uncertainty becomes not a flaw, but fertile ground. The seeds of your present reality were sown by the conditions and choices, both conscious and unconscious, that have brought you here. Yet the seeds of your future are being planted right now in the way you meet this moment. You can plant seeds of awareness simply by observing your patterns without the compulsion to fix them immediately. You can plant seeds of compassion by treating yourself with the tenderness you would extend to a dear friend in pain. You can plant seeds of courage by taking small steps toward authenticity, even when doing so feels frightening. You can plant seeds of trust by holding faith that your sincere efforts to grow and heal matter, even when the results are not visible. These seeds may not bloom tomorrow, or even next month. Some of the most profound transformations in a human life unfold slowly, quietly, and almost imperceptibly, like a tree pushing its roots deeper into the soil, long before its branches reach toward the sky. But every single moment of conscious choice, every seemingly small act of kindness extended toward yourself or another, every decision to pause and respond rather than react, contributes to the gradual reshaping of your inner landscape. Transformation rarely happens through sudden upheaval. More often, it unfolds like the patient work of loosening soil around roots that have long been bound. The tight binding doesn't need to be cut away in one dramatic act. Sometimes the most skillful and compassionate way is to gently release the old constraints, respecting the fact that they once served a purpose, even as you prepare to move beyond them. In the story of the plant, it did not burst into fullness overnight the moment its roots were freed. It needed time to stretch into new soil, time to strengthen its foundation, time for shoots and leaves to gather nourishment from the sun. Each small expansion of its roots created the possibility for further growth. Day by day, season by season, what was once the weakest plant became the most magnificent in the garden. This same promise is woven into the fabric of your life. Your current challenges, your confusion, even the sense of being stuck, are not evidence that you are fundamentally broken or lagging behind. They are signs that old constraints are loosening, that something new is quietly stirring beneath the surface. They are invitations from life itself, asking you to trust that growth is already underway, even if it is not yet visible. The garden of your life is preparing for its next season of flourishing. The question is not whether seeds are being planted. They always are. The real question is whether you are planting them consciously or unconsciously, with presence or with distraction, with compassion or with judgment. Every moment offers a fresh chance to choose which kind of garden you will tend in the soil of your own being. And then, inevitably, comes a moment that shakes even the most carefully cultivated story. For many people, there arrives a day when you look into the mirror and do not quite recognize the person reflected back. It is not simply the changes of aging or the marks of time upon your face. It is something deeper the recognition that the self you have been presenting, the identity you've been living, no longer matches the truth of your experience. Perhaps it comes suddenly after a major life upheaval, a divorce that dismantles the roles you once played, a career change that renders your old measures of success meaningless, a loss that rearranges everything you thought was solid. Or perhaps it creeps in slowly, the quiet realization that the performance of identity you've been maintaining no longer feels authentic, that the energy required to keep the mask in place is exhausting your spirit. In these moments, the ground beneath your sense of self begins to tremble. The questions arise. If I am not who I thought I was, then who am I? If the story I have been telling is not true, then what is? These questions can feel terrifying, as though the very center of your being is dissolving. Yet what if this unraveling is not a crisis, but a profound opening? What if the loss of old certainty is not a fall into chaos, but an entrance into a freedom you could not have imagined before? This is where the Buddhist teaching on emptiness, or shunyata in Sanskrit, offers a radically different perspective. Emptiness is not a barren void, not a bleak absence where nothing matters. It is the recognition that all identities, all fixed ideas of who we are fluid, interdependent, and spacious. It is not about negating your existence, but about seeing through the rigid boundaries of self that keep you trapped. Emptiness reveals a way of being that is vast, alive, and deeply liberating, a freedom from the exhausting labor of constantly upholding an image. When teachers speak of emptiness, they are not dismissing life or suggesting that you or the world do not matter. Rather, they are pointing to the liberating truth that because everything is interdependent, fluid, and without a fixed essence, you are never bound by the narrow stories you once believed about yourself. They are pointing towards something far more subtle, yet infinitely more freeing. It is the recognition that you are not as solid, fixed, or permanently defined as you might have believed. The boundaries you've drawn around yourself, the labels you've accepted from others, the story you've rehearsed again and again about who you are, none of these are as absolute as they appear. They are more like shifting sands than immovable stone, more like clouds forming and dissolving in the sky than like a statue carved in granite. Consider this: even as you read or listen to these words, countless processes within you are changing. Millions of your cells are dying and being replaced. Thoughts rise and pass like waves on the surface of the mind. Emotions flicker and shift, sometimes subtle as a breeze, other times powerful as a storm. Your breath is constantly moving. No two inhalations are the same, no two exhalations identical. Your attention itself flows from sound to sensation, from memory to anticipation, and back again. When you look closely, what is staying the same long enough to be called a permanent, unchanging self? This is not meant as an abstract philosophical puzzle. It is a direct invitation to observe your own experience with clarity. The more carefully you search for a solid, enduring core of I, the more elusive it becomes. Not because something is missing or wrong within you, but because this idea of a fixed self was always a mental construction, a story useful for navigating life, but not the ultimate truth. And yet, we cling to this solid identity as if it were life itself. Why? Because we build so much upon it. Understanding how this attachment creates suffering requires looking at the tremendous energy we spend maintaining the image of a consistent self. Think of the constant effort that goes into being the same person day after day. You have to remember who you're supposed to be, defend positions you took years ago, live up to expectations based on past versions of yourself. If you identify as the responsible one, you feel torn apart if you dare to act spontaneously. If your identity is tied to being successful, any failure, no matter how small, threatens your very sense of existence. If you pride yourself on independence, asking for help feels like betrayal. The more rigidly we define ourselves, the smaller and more confined our world becomes. What once began as a way of knowing who we are turns into a prison of our own making. And what makes this prison particularly exhausting is the constant vigilance it demands. You must monitor your thoughts to ensure they align with your self-image. You must filter your experiences to avoid contradictions. You must defend yourself against anything that challenges the story you've built. It's like trying to carry water cupped in your hands. You might manage for a moment, but eventually it slips through your fingers, leaving only strain and emptiness. There is an old story that illustrates this perfectly. In a small mountain village, two trees grew side by side. One was an ancient oak, vast and unyielding, its trunk thick with pride and permanence. The other was a young bamboo, slender and supple, swaying easily with even the gentlest wind. On calm days, the oak would boast to the bamboo, "Look at me, I stand firm and unmoving against all storms. I do not bend or waver like you. My strength is permanence. That is what it means to be a real tree." The bamboo never argued. It only listened quietly, continuing its gentle dance in the breeze, flexible and fluid, neither clinging to strength nor fearing movement. Then, one winter, a storm unlike any the village had ever seen swept through the mountains. The winds that swept across the village were unlike anything its people had ever encountered before, roaring and howling through the valleys with a force that seemed almost unstoppable. The great oak tree, steadfast in its nature, stood tall and immovable, determined not to yield. With all its strength, it resisted, as if to prove its permanence, its solidity, its unshakable presence in the face of the storm. Yet, the power of the wind grew stronger and stronger. As the storm intensified, the oak's very refusal to bend became the reason for its undoing. Its resistance, which once seemed like strength, transformed into weakness. Unable to yield, unable to adapt, the oak snapped under the relentless pressure. The proud tree, which had always defined itself by its unchanging strength, was finally uprooted, torn from the ground, and destroyed. Meanwhile, not far away, the bamboo bent so far beneath the violent gusts that its top nearly brushed the earth. Unlike the oak, it offered no resistance, no rigid stand, no battle to maintain a fixed form. Instead, it moved with the storm, swaying, bowing, and yielding as the fierce winds rushed around and through it. And when the storm finally passed, the bamboo rose upright again, unharmed, renewed, and just as alive as before. The villagers who had witnessed this contrast between the oak and the bamboo began to understand a profound truth about life. True strength is not found in unmovable rigidity, but in responsive. Real resilience does not come from holding firm against all change, but from adapting with grace, while never losing one's essential nature. This is the gift of emptiness, the wisdom of the bamboo, which offers a lesson for being human. When we stop trying to defend a solid, unchanging identity, when we stop insisting on permanence in a world of impermanence, we uncover a deeper strength and freedom we never imagined possible. Like bamboo, we can bend with life's storms without breaking. We can adapt to new circumstances without losing ourselves. We can grow and transform without feeling that change is a threat to who we are. The relief that comes from not being fixed is something that can only be fully understood through experience. Imagine the exhaustion melting away when you no longer have to defend an image of yourself that was never big enough to contain all of who you truly are. Imagine the lightness that comes with no longer carrying the burden of being consistent with every past decision, every past opinion, every past version of yourself. There is a kind of freedom in responding to each moment as it is, without being shackled to what came before. Feel what it might be like to admit you don't know something without it undermining your competence. Feel the possibility of making a mistake without it meaning that you are fundamentally flawed. This does not mean abandoning your values or becoming wishy-washy in your sense of self. The bamboo has its own nature. It does not pretend to be an oak or a pine, yet it holds its nature lightly, expressing it through flexibility, not rigidity. In the same way, you too can have values, preferences, and opinions, but you need not cling to them as fixed definitions of who you are. Instead, you can allow them to live and breathe, to shift and evolve, just as you do. When you begin to hold yourself more lightly, daily life takes on an ease you may not have felt before. You can disagree with someone without the exhausting need to prove you are right. You can hear feedback without rushing to defend your self-image. You can experiment with new things without worrying about whether they fit a rigid identity. You can even change your mind without feeling as though you are betraying your past self. In this way, life becomes less about defending and more about living. To bring this into practice, try something simple right now. Think of one way you usually describe yourself. Perhaps you say, "I'm an introvert," or "I'm not creative," or "I don't like conflict." Notice how solid and defining such a statement can feel. Now, instead of holding it as an absolute truth, try reframing it as a pattern you have observed. Rather than saying, "I am this way," try saying, "I have tended to be this way," or "this has often been true for me in certain situations." This small shift opens space for growth. It allows you to see yourself not as a fixed identity, but as a living, breathing being capable of change. Do you feel the difference? The first way of thinking locks you inside a rigid box, while the second opens up spaciousness. It allows for change, growth, and the possibility of becoming more than you have been before. It acknowledges your patterns without insisting that they must always define you. It honors your past without turning it into your destiny. This shift from clinging to identity toward recognizing tendencies, from saying "I am" to saying "I have been," is one of the most practical ways to understand emptiness. It creates what might be called developmental space, a field in which you can evolve without needing to demolish your entire sense of self in the process. Consider the example of Sarah, a woman who had always seen herself as the helper in her family and among her friends. This identity gave her a sense of worth and purpose. It reassured her that she was valuable and needed, yet it also trapped her in unhealthy cycles. She found herself giving until she was completely depleted, saying yes when her heart wanted to say no, and drawing in people who eagerly took advantage of her generosity. When Sarah first encountered the teaching on emptiness, she pushed back against it. "If I'm not the helpful one, then who am I?" she asked herself with genuine fear. But as time passed, she began to experiment with holding her identity more lightly. Instead of repeating, "I am someone who always helps others," she began to reframe it. "I have a gift for helping, and I can choose when and how to offer it." That small shift created a vast new sense of freedom. She realized she could still be generous, supportive, and caring, but now those qualities flowed from choice instead of compulsion. She discovered she could say no to requests that drained her without feeling like she was betraying her very nature. She could ask for help herself without spiraling into an identity crisis. Her helpfulness became more balanced and skillful because it arose from a place of abundance rather than from the desperate need to preserve an image of being indispensable. This is how the teaching on emptiness functions in the practical day-to-day. It doesn't strip you of your qualities or leave you bland and featureless. Instead, it releases your qualities from the prison of rigid identity so that they can emerge more freely, flexibly, and wisely. Yet there is an even deeper dimension to this teaching, As you grow more comfortable with the emptiness of fixed identity, you begin to notice that this emptiness pervades everything you once believed to be solid. The problems in your life, which once loomed as heavy and permanent, reveal themselves as temporary conditions, arising from causes and conditions that will inevitably shift. The emotions that once defined entire days show themselves to be like weather, passing clouds that move across the wide sky of awareness. Even the thoughts that once felt like the unquestionable voice of truth are seen for what they are, fleeting mental events, arising and dissolving without substance. This recognition opens a profound sense of spaciousness. When you are no longer solid, you cannot truly be broken. When you are no longer fixed, you cannot be trapped. When you are no longer clinging to permanence, you cannot be ruined. The very experiences that once felt threatening to your existence transform into nothing more than movements of energy passing through awareness. Life continues to unfold, but instead of being crushed beneath its weight, you begin to experience yourself as the open space in which all things arise and pass away. People often worry that understanding emptiness will leave them passive, indifferent, or unmotivated. They wonder, if nothing is permanent, why bother trying to change anything at all? But this is a misunderstanding of what emptiness really makes possible. In truth, emptiness is not a call to disengagement, but the source of profound responsiveness. When you are no longer spending so much energy defending a fixed self, that same energy becomes available for genuine, fresh participation in life's situation. When you are not locked into protecting an identity or clinging to a rigid position, you can truly listen to what is needed. When you are not attached to being right, you can instead focus on being helpful. Think back to the bamboo in the story. Its way of being was not passive. It was deeply alive, fully responsive, and completely engaged with the conditions of the storm. It did not resist, nor did it collapse. It participated wholeheartedly with each moment's reality, yet without the desperate need to control what could not be controlled. This is the kind of freedom emptiness makes available, not detachment from life, but intimate participation without clinging. It is a way of being that allows you to move with the flow of events while remaining grounded in your true nature. This responsiveness becomes especially valuable during difficult times, when life feels heavy or painful. The tendency in such moments is to make suffering into part of your identity. I'm someone who struggles with depression. I'm not good at relationships. I'm the kind of person who always fails at this. These narratives of identity layer unnecessary suffering on top of the pain you are already experiencing. Yet when you begin to see the emptiness of fixed identity, the burden lifts. Difficult experiences remain difficult, but they are no longer evidence of some deep and permanent flaw in your character. They are not predictions of your unchangeable destiny. They are simply conditions arising and passing, like weather moving across the vast, open sky of your awareness. This perspective doesn't deny or diminish real pain. It does not suggest you should detach from your experience or pretend it isn't happening. Instead, it offers a framework for meeting pain directly, without piling on the extra suffering that comes from believing your struggles define who you are. You can feel sadness without collapsing into the story of being a sad person. You can experience anxiety without adopting the identity of an anxious person. You can endure a difficult period without turning it into proof that you are fundamentally broken. Emptiness allows you to encounter life's storms without becoming trapped inside them. The freedom of emptiness is at its heart, the freedom to be fully human without being imprisoned by any single version of yourself. It allows you to embody strength when strength is required, and to soften when tenderness is called for. It lets you be serious when gravity is needed, and playful when lightness is appropriate. It gives you room to be confident when you have knowledge to share, and humble when you don't. No longer do you live under the pressure of being consistent with every past version of yourself. Instead, you live fluidly, authentically, with presence and responsiveness. This fluidity does not make you unreliable or inauthentic. On the contrary, like the bamboo, you remain rooted in your essential nature, but you express that nature with flexibility, according to the needs of the moment. Your authenticity no longer comes from rigid consistency, but from genuine presence, being exactly who the situation calls you to be, without pretense or resistance. And perhaps most importantly for those who feel lost, the teaching of emptiness reveals that there was never a fixed self to lose in the first place. What you thought was missing was never solid or permanent to begin with. The confusion you feel is not about losing yourself, but about realizing that the self you thought you had to find was always a construction, a story layered on top of experience. The freedom you have been seeking does not lie in building a stronger, more unshakable identity. It arises when you relax out of the demand for any fixed identity at all. This is the deepest gift of emptiness. Not emptiness as void, but emptiness as freedom, openness, and the spaciousness to live fully. You are not a problem that needs to be solved, nor a project waiting to be completed. You are an unfolding expression of life itself, fluid, dynamic, and alive like a river, and as spacious and air-changing as the sky above. When you stop trying to trap this flowing expression into the rigid walls of a fixed identity, you discover a freedom and vitality you may never have known was possible. And yes, the storm will always come again. But now you know the secret of the bamboo. You can bend without breaking, change without losing your essence, and dance with whatever life places before you, all while remaining rooted in the boundless awareness that was never as small or as solid as you once imagined. Dancing with difficulty, life has a curious way of sending the same challenges back to your doorstep, doesn't it? Just when you think you've mastered the lesson, outgrown the pattern, or healed the wound, something strikingly similar appears once more. Perhaps it is a new person who triggers the same old insecurity, a fresh situation that reawakens a familiar fear, or yet another version of the choice points where you so often stumble. Your first instinct might be discouragement. Here we go again. I thought I was past this. But what if the return of these difficulties is not proof of failure? What if instead it is a sign that you are now ready for a deeper layer of understanding? Buddhist teachings offer a powerful reframe for these recurring struggles. Through the concept of samsara, this term is often misunderstood as a grim, endless loop of meaningless suffering. In truth, it points to something far more hopeful. The challenges of your life are not circles trapping you in the same place forever. They are spirals, carrying you back into familiar territory, but from a higher vantage point each time. To see your difficulties as spirals rather than circles changes everything. A circle delivers you to the same spot again and again. A spiral, by contrast, revisits familiar themes, but each turn contains the wisdom and perspective gained from all the previous revolution. Think of climbing a spiral staircase. As you ascend, you face the same direction again and again, yet each time you are higher than before. To an outside observer, it may look as though you are going in circles, endlessly repeating yourself. But from your own perspective on the staircase, you know that every revolution carries you upward. The view keeps expanding, even while the motion feels familiar. This is the deeper truth of healing and growth. You do not vanquish your oldest patterns once and for all with a single dramatic breakthrough. Instead, you meet them repeatedly, and each encounter gives you the chance to bring more wisdom, greater compassion, and deeper understanding than before. Sarah experienced this reality when she noticed her recurring pattern of entering relationships with emotionally unavailable partners. The first time she recognized the pattern, she felt shame and tried to force herself to make better choices. When she found herself drawn again to another unavailable person, she judged herself harshly for failing to learn the lesson. But as she began to embrace the spiral nature of growth, her relationship to the pattern changed. She realized that each return was not failure, but invitation, an opportunity to see the pattern from a new level with greater clarity. Each cycle revealed something different about the deeper need her heart was trying to meet. The first time, she focused primarily on changing her choices. The second time, she turned inward and explored the childhood experiences that had quietly shaped her template for love. The third time Sarah faced her recurring pattern, she approached it differently. Instead of seeking rescue from others, she turned inward and began building the capacity to stay present with her own emotions. Rather than running from discomfort or looking to someone else for relief, she cultivated the strength to be with what arose in her inner world. Each cycle of the spiral carried her deeper, not in circles, but into greater clarity and integration. Eventually, the pattern shifted, not because she forced it to disappear, but because she had reached its roots and worked through them, rather than endlessly treating the symptoms. The transformation was not instantaneous. It required several spirals, each one essential, each one contributing something unique to the whole. This understanding becomes especially important when we encounter what Buddhism personifies as Mara, the inner adversary, the presence of fear, doubt, and resistance that often appears precisely when we are making progress. In the traditional stories, Mara visited the Buddha not just once, but repeatedly, attempting to pull him from his path with temptations, uncertainties, and threats. In our own lives, Mara often shows up in subtler but equally disruptive ways. Perhaps it is the voice that whispers you are not qualified right before you apply for your dream job. Perhaps it is the sudden wave of anxiety that arises as you are about to commit to something deeply aligned with your value. Perhaps it is self-doubt that creeps in just when your confidence is beginning to grow, or cynicism that hardens your heart just as it begins to open. The usual response to such inner adversaries is to fight them, suppress them, or try to silence them altogether. We treat them as enemies to be conquered. But within the Tibetan tradition lies a radically different invitation. Invite your demons to tea. This is not an indulgence of destructive impulses, nor is it an excuse to wallow in negativity. Instead, it rests on the recognition that what we resist tends to persist, while what we meet with awareness has the potential to transform. By sitting down with our inner difficulties, we shift from combat to curiosity, from rejection to relationship, from annihilation to understanding. You can practice this right now with something small and manageable. Think of an emotion or mental state that has been visiting you recently. Maybe it is anxiety about an uncertain future, sadness over a loss, or frustration with a situation that refuses to change. Instead of trying to banish it, imagine welcoming it as a guest at your table. Picture yourself saying, "I see you. I know you are here for a reason. What do you need me to understand?" Then listen, not for immediate answers or tidy solutions, but for the subtle intelligence hidden inside the discomfort. You may be surprised at what begins to emerge. Anxiety, when explored, often carries important information about values you fear might be violated. Sadness frequently holds the imprint of love that has no outlet. Anger often points to boundaries that require attention and care. When you stop waging war against these experiences and instead listen to them, they begin to reveal themselves, not as enemies, but as disguised allies. The reason resistance so often produces persistence lies in the very mechanics of human consciousness. Whatever you push against pushes back. Whatever you try to suppress tends to grow stronger in the shadows. This is not a defect in character. It is the psyche's natural way of protecting itself from erasure. Think of the classic example, If someone tells you not to think about a white elephant, what happens? Immediately, your mind becomes filled with images of white elephants. The very act of resistance intensifies the presence of what you are trying to deny. The instruction not to think about something, ironically, reinforces the very thought you are trying to avoid. The same principle applies not only to thoughts, but also to emotions, patterns, and difficult experiences. When you resist, you amplify. Marcus learned this lesson through his ongoing struggle with perfectionism. He believed the solution was sheer willpower, so whenever he noticed himself obsessing over details or delaying because something wasn't quite right, he would mentally command himself to just accept good enough. Yet the more forcefully he tried to silence his perfectionist tendencies, the more powerful and persistent they seemed to become. Instead of loosening their grip, the inner critic tightened its hold. The shift began only when Marcus stopped approaching his perfectionism as an enemy to be defeated and started treating it as a messenger to be understood. He began asking gentle but profound questions. What is this perfectionism trying to protect me from? What might happen if I allowed something to remain imperfect? What fear is hiding beneath this relentless need for everything to be flawless? Through this patient inquiry, he uncovered the truth that his perfectionism was rooted in a deep fear of criticism and rejection. It was not random or malicious. It was his psyche's way of attempting to shield him, to make him invulnerable to the pain of judgment. Once he recognized this underlying fear, he no longer needed to battle the surface behavior with force. Instead, he could meet it with compassion and address the vulnerability that gave rise to it. This realization points to a broader and immensely practical art, the art of welcoming discomfort. Welcoming discomfort does not mean seeking out suffering, glorifying pain, or pretending that difficult experiences are enjoyable. It means cultivating the ability to remain present with discomfort without immediately scrambling to escape it. Whenever discomfort arises, your nervous system, trained by evolution for survival, interprets it as danger and often activates the fight, flight, or freeze responses. Yet most forms of emotional and psychological discomfort are not actual threats to your survival. They are simply unfamiliar, unwanted, or intense. The true practice is learning to tell the difference between what is genuinely dangerous and what is merely uncomfortable. The most effective way to begin is small. Imagine the next time you encounter a minor frustration, perhaps sitting in traffic or waiting in a long line. Instead of distracting yourself or wishing the moment away, try breathing into the feeling. Notice where the tension arises in your body. Pay attention to the thoughts that accompany it. See if you can bring curiosity to the experience, rather than demanding that it change. This simple practice strengthens what might be called discomfort tolerance, the capacity to sit with difficulty without being swept away by it. As this capacity deepens, you become less reactive to life's inevitable challenges. In a tense conversation with your partner, you may find you can stay grounded rather than shutting down or exploding. Before a presentation, you can allow the nervousness to exist without letting it unravel your preparation. When sadness washes over you, you can feel it fully without needing to numb it or fix it right away. Each of these moments becomes an opportunity to prove to yourself that discomfort does not have to be dangerous. Instead, it can be a teacher, expanding your resilience and widening the range of experiences you are able to hold. There is a story that brings this lesson to life with profound simplicity, a reminder that even in the most ordinary situations, the practice of welcoming discomfort can open the door to freedom. In a quiet farming village, there lived an elderly woman who was known for her unusual way of relating to storms. While the rest of the villagers would scramble to board up their windows, secure their homes, and huddle in fear when dark clouds gathered on the horizon, she would step out onto her porch and stand calmly, watching the weather approach. She did not flinch at the growl of thunder or the flash of lightning. Instead, she gazed with a serene presence, as if she were greeting an old friend. Her neighbors thought her behavior was not only strange, but dangerous. With worry in their voices, they would call out, "Why don't you take shelter like the rest of us? Don't you realize how destructive these storms can be?" The old woman would simply smile gently and reply, "I've lived through many storms. I've learned they always pass, and more often than not, they bring exactly what the land needs." One year, the village faced a severe trial. The worst drought in decades had parched the soil, leaving crops shriveled and wells running dry. Fear crept into the hearts of the villagers as they watched their livelihoods wither before their eyes. Whispers of despair filled the air, and the people began to wonder how much longer they could survive without water. Then, suddenly, the storms arrived, massive, fierce thunderstorms unlike any they had seen in years. The sky roared with thunder, lightning split the heavens in jagged streaks, and rain poured down in torrents that rattled rooftops. The villagers trembled, terrified by the intensity of nature's power, and shut themselves tightly inside their home. But true to her way, the old woman once again stepped onto her porch. She stood quietly and watched the chaos unfold, her eyes calm as she witnessed the storm's wild dance across the land. When the season of storms finally passed, the village emerged to survey what had happened, and they were astonished. What had seemed like pure destruction had, in truth, saved them. The heavy rains had broken the drought completely, soaking the earth until the fields were fertile again. The lightning, though frightening, had sparked small fires that cleared away dead undergrowth, making the soil richer and more alive. Even the fierce winds, which had seemed so merciless, had carried pollen across great distances, ensuring the plants would flourish in the coming months. What had once been feared as chaos and ruin had revealed itself as nature's mysterious and restorative design. Standing among her neighbors, the old woman spoke with a quiet authority that now carried weight they could not ignore. "You see," she told them, "the storms were never the problem. It was our fear of them that blinded us to their gifts. When you stop running from the storm and instead learn to stand with it, you discover that it often brings exactly what is needed." Her words settled into the villagers' hearts as they looked upon the renewed fields and replenished well. The wisdom she embodied was no longer strange, but deeply true. This story carries a profound lesson into the storms of our own lives. The storms of emotion, challenge, and change that arrive without invitation. They may feel overwhelming, destructive, and frightening, but often they hold within them the seeds of transformation we most need. Yet these gifts can only be received if we are willing to remain present with the intensity rather than scrambling for shelter at the first sign of difficulty. Welcoming storms does not mean becoming passive in the face of genuine problems, nor does it mean tolerating harm when action is required. It means cultivating the wisdom to discern when to take decisive steps and when to surrender, when to act, and when to allow, when to transform what is within our control, and when to find peace with what is not. When you begin to dance with difficulty, instead of fighting it, something remarkable happens. The very obstacles you once cursed begin to reveal themselves as gateways. The anxiety that once seemed like unbearable suffering begins to show itself as sensitivity, a signpost pointing to what matters most and needs honoring. The perfectionism that once felt like a curse softens into conscientiousness, a careful attention to detail that simply seeks a healthier channel for expression. What you thought were enemies become teachers. What you believed were burdens transform into guides. In standing with the storm, you uncover not just resilience, but also a deeper harmony with the flow of life itself. The sadness that once seemed endless gradually reveals itself to be more than just pain. It becomes a teacher, guiding you into the depths of your own capacity to love. Beneath the heaviness, it shows that you would not grieve so deeply if you did not also care so deep. Yet this kind of transformation does not occur overnight, nor does it arise through forced optimism, hollow affirmations, or attempts at spiritual bypassing. It unfolds slowly like the seasons turning, through the patient and repeated practice of meeting whatever life brings with presence, curiosity, and compassion. This alchemy of experience requires a willingness to stay with what is uncomfortable and to trust that even your most difficult states carry within them a hidden wisdom. Sometimes that wisdom emerges in ways you would never consciously choose. It may arrive disguised as a loss, a setback, or a wave of overwhelming emotion. But over time, as you learn to remain present with each experience instead of resisting it, you begin to notice that your system, your body, your mind, your heart knows how to move toward balance on its own. The spiral of life continues to carry you back to familiar territories of challenge and growth. But each return no longer feels like defeat. Now you know the secret. You are not stuck in circles. You are climbing, each step taking you to a higher vantage point, each cycle offering a new layer of understanding. What once looked like a threat to your peace may actually be the very storm your inner landscape has been waiting for, bringing the rain needed to awaken what lies dormant within you. So when the next wave of difficulty arrives, as it inevitably will, remember the image of the old woman standing calmly on her porch. Step out to meet the storm with presence rather than shrinking back in fear. When your inner demons appear, do not waste your energy trying to banish them. Invite them to tea. Instead, trust that what feels like chaos may in fact be the clearing that prepares the ground for new growth. The dance with difficulty has never been about learning to love pain for its own sake. It is about learning to trust the intelligence of your own unfolding, even when that unfolding refuses to follow the script of your preferences. It is about becoming so rooted in presence that you can bend with the winds of change without being broken by them. And it is about discovering, often to your surprise, that what once appeared to be an enemy was, all along, a teacher in disguise, carrying wisdom in its shadowed hands. There comes a moment in every sincere search for meaning when words themselves begin to feel inadequate. You have read the books, listened to the teachers, analyzed your patterns, and tried to think your way toward understanding. And yet the deepest questions, who am I, really? What is the point of all this? How do I find peace? Remain just beyond the reach of language, elusive and untouchable. In these moments, it is easy to believe you are failing at your spiritual journey. If you cannot explain your insights to others, if you cannot even think clearly about your own experience, then surely you tell yourself, you must not have understood anything at all. But what if this wordless place is not a dead end? What if it is, in fact, a threshold? What if the silence that emerges when seeking has exhausted itself is not emptiness, but fullness too vast, too rich, too immediate to be contained by speech? In the Buddhist tradition, this is called noble silence. It is not the silence of ignorance, or the silence of having nothing left to say. It is the silence that remains when all the concepts, explanations, and mental constructions have fallen away, leaving only direct presence with what is. It is a silence that speaks, not in words, but in the stillness of being itself. Think back to the moments in your life when words seemed the least useful, when language felt not only inadequate, but intrusive. Perhaps it was the first time you held your newborn child, when the sheer mystery of new life filled you beyond the reach of description. Or perhaps it was when you stood beside someone you love as they took their final breath, the silence of the room more eloquent than anything that could be spoken. Maybe it was a sunset so vast and beautiful that your mind fell away completely, leaving only awe. In such moments, words do not enrich the experience, they diminish it. To try to describe them is like attempting to hold the entire ocean in a teacup. Whatever you capture is only a fragment, and the essence escapes. This is not the failure of language. It is language reaching its natural limit. There are dimensions of human experience that cannot be translated into concepts or categories, that can only be known directly, intimately, and wordlessly. And paradoxically, it is often in these silent encounters that the deepest understanding dawns. Noble silence is the gateway to this kind of knowing. It is not the silence of emptiness, but of fullness too vast for word. It is not withdrawal, but arrival, the arrival into direct presence with what is. This noble silence offers something our culture is starving for: permission. Permission to stop seeking long enough to notice what is already here. We live in an age of endless information and analysis, where every question is expected to have a readily available answer, preferably delivered instantly. But not all questions are meant to be answered. Some questions are invitations, not to conclusions, but to living. Who am I? What is this life? What is love, grief, or beauty? These are not riddles to be solved, but mysteries to be inhabited. When you finally rest from the constant hunt for solutions, something remarkable begins to happen. The restless waters of the mind, endlessly churned by analysis and self-interrogation, start to set. Like a glass of muddy water left untouched, the particles sink and clarity gradually appears. Not because you created it, but because it was always there beneath the disturbance. This clarity is not manufactured through effort or forced insight. It arises naturally when the compulsion to understand, to categorize, and to solve relaxes. It is the clarity of awareness itself, uncovered through non-effort. Maria discovered this in her own life during a season of profound struggle. For months she had been caught in the grip of anxiety and depression. Desperate for relief, she devoured every self-help book she could find, tried therapy, meditation apps, journaling exercises, anything that promised an answer to what was wrong and how to fix it. Each method seemed promising at first, but its effect quickly faded. Insights that felt life-changing one day lost their power the next. And the harder she tried, the more overwhelmed she became. Eventually, she began to believe she was failing at healing itself, as though even recovery was another task she wasn't getting right. Then, one evening, worn out from all her striving, Maria simply sat in her garden, with no plan and no practice. She wasn't meditating. She wasn't doing gratitude exercises. She wasn't trying to achieve anything. She was just breathing, watching the light shift as the day turned to evening. For the first time in months, her mind fell quiet, not because she had found a solution, but because briefly she had stopped searching for one. In that quiet, she did not uncover an explanation for her anxiety, nor did she find a cure for her depression. What she found instead was something deeper, a recognition that she was okay, even in the midst of not being okay. She discovered the freedom of not knowing, the spaciousness of being present without demanding answers. She saw that much of her suffering had come not from the anxiety itself, but from her relentless insistence on understanding, controlling, and eliminating it. When she allowed herself to rest in the uncertainty, without knowing why she felt anxious or when it would pass, the anxiety was still there, but it no longer defined the whole of her experience. This is one of the most practical skills you can cultivate, the art of being comfortable with not knowing. It allows you to stay present with uncertainty instead of scrambling for false certainty. It lets you say, "I don't know," without shame, without feeling like a failure, without rushing to fill the silence with premature answers. It gives you permission to be human in a world that so often demands impossible levels of clarity, control, and immediate answers. Try this for yourself right now. Think of something in your life that you've been trying to figure out, perhaps a relationship issue that keeps circling in your mind, a career decision that feels heavy with consequence, or a personal pattern you just can't seem to break no matter how much you analyze it. Instead of diving back into the familiar spiral of thoughts, trying to calculate the right solution, pause for a moment and simply acknowledge to yourself, I don't know what to do about this right now, and that's okay. Then notice, with sincerity, what happens in your body the moment you speak these words. For many people, there's an immediate sense of relief, a quiet softening in the chest, a loosening of tension in the shoulders, or even a gentle exhale they didn't realize they had been holding back. The pressure to produce an answer right away begins to lift. The mind's restless churning slows down. You're still in the same situation, but something subtle shifts. You are no longer locked in combat with the uncertainty of. This leads us to something very subtle, but profoundly transformative: the space between thoughts. Most of us experience our thinking as a continuous, unbroken stream, one thought flowing seamlessly into the next, like water rushing in a river without pause. But if you slow down enough, if you begin to really pay careful attention, you'll notice that there are tiny fleeting gaps. These gaps are like slivers of open sky appearing between passing clouds. They are moments of stillness, brief pauses between the end of one thought and the beginning of another. And it is within these delicate gaps that noble silence quietly lives, tucked into the ordinary rhythm of our awareness. They are brief tastes of an awareness that exists entirely independent of mental commentary. In these micro moments of silence, something remarkable happens. You get a glimpse of what you are when you're not busy thinking about what you are. It is a direct taste of being. Learning to notice and rest in these natural pauses is both simple and profound. Instead of rushing to immediately fill every silence with more words, more images, more conclusions, you begin to recognize the value of simply being with the silence itself. This doesn't demand elaborate techniques, complex rituals, or years of disciplined meditation practice. It only requires a willingness to pay attention to what is already naturally occurring. Over time, the recognition of these natural silences deepens, and the moments themselves begin to expand, not because you are forcing them open, but because your awareness is learning to trust them, to value them, to rest inside them. You begin to discover something surprising. Silence is not a lack, not an empty void that needs to be quickly filled. Silence is not absence, it is presence. It is the fullness of everything before your mind divides it into categories, before commentary rushes in to name, judge, or explain. Silence is the raw aliveness of reality, as it is, unfiltered and immediate. There is a story that captures this mystery with extraordinary simplicity. A renowned teacher, celebrated for his wisdom, was once invited to deliver a lecture at a prestigious university. The event was grandly announced, and on the appointed day, hundreds of professors, students, and intellectuals gathered in the largest auditorium on campus. The air buzzed with anticipation. Everyone had come eager to drink in insights from someone regarded as one of the greatest living minds of the time. When the moment arrived, the teacher walked calmly onto the stage. He bowed deeply to the assembled audience, acknowledging their presence, and then, without saying a word, sat down in meditation posture. At first, the room was charged with expectancy. The audience leaned forward, waiting for the lecture to begin. 5 minutes passed in complete silence, then 10, then 20. A wave of restlessness rippled through the crowd. People began to whisper to each other nervously, trying to make sense of the unexpected stillness. Some speculated, was the teacher ill, perhaps having a medical emergency? Had he forgotten where he was? Had something gone terribly wrong? As time stretched on, frustration grew. A few people, unable to bear what they interpreted as wasted time, stood up and left. Others remained but fidgeted impatiently in their seats, glancing at their watches, checking their phones, sighing under their breath. Yet, amidst the discomfort, a smaller group of people began to settle into the experience. They stopped waiting for something external to happen and turned their attention inward. They began to notice the texture of the silence itself. They felt the spaciousness of the moment, the weight of their own presence, the vibrant aliveness that remained even in the absence of spoken words or intellectual explanations. Exactly 1 hour after he had first taken his seat, the teacher slowly stood, bowed once again to the audience, and walked quietly off the stage, having delivered a lecture without a single word. The audience was divided in its response to what had unfolded. Many left the auditorium feeling cheated, angry, and resentful, convinced that their time had been wasted on nothing but empty silence. They had expected eloquent words, clever arguments, and intellectual stimulation, yet instead they received only stillness. But others, fewer in number, yet deeper in perception, walked away with a very different impression. They recognized that they had been given the most profound teaching possible, a direct pointing to wisdom beyond words. For them, the silence had not been an absence, but a presence, a mirror revealing the truth that cannot be explained, but only experienced. Later, the teacher explained to his close students what had truly taken place. He told them, "I could have spent that entire hour talking about wisdom, analyzing it, describing it, breaking it down into concepts for people to understand, memorize, and perhaps even repeat to others. But that would have been teaching about wisdom, not wisdom itself. Instead, I gave them the chance to encounter wisdom directly, not as an idea, but as an experience. Those who could rest in the silence without demanding that it be something else discovered, something no lecture could ever have given them. They touched the source of all understanding, the clear awareness that exists before concepts, beyond words, deeper than knowledge." This points to something revolutionary about the way real wisdom is transmitted. It does not primarily flow through information, explanation, or elaborate speech, but through presence. When someone has genuinely touched the source of awareness within themselves, their very being carries a quality that transcends what words can communicate. Their silence teaches more than their sentences ever could. Their calm presence itself gives others permission to stop seeking, to stop striving, and to simply be. You may have experienced this yourself, though perhaps you did not recognize it at the time. Think back to moments when you were with someone who carried a quiet presence that seemed to calm you, even though they said nothing particularly insightful. Perhaps you sat in the company of someone whose silence felt more nourishing and restorative than the chatter of most conversations. This is the teaching function of noble silence. It doesn't instruct with arguments or persuade with rhetoric. It gently reminds others of their own inherent capacity for peace. Yet, noble silence is not merely something received from teachers, mentors, or others who embody it. It is also something you can cultivate and offer in your own life. When you learn to rest comfortably in not knowing, when you allow yourself to be at ease with silence instead of rushing to fill it, you become a source of permission for others as well. In your stillness, you create space for those around you to discover stillness within themselves. This can have deeply practical applications in everyday life. When someone shares a problem with you, instead of rushing to offer advice or solutions, you can give them the gift of silent listening, creating a space where their own truth may surface. In moments of conversation, when an awkward pause arises, Instead of filling it with nervous chatter, you can let the pause breathe, allowing the natural rhythm of communication to deepen. Even in moments when you feel the urge to explain yourself endlessly, you can sometimes let your quiet presence speak for you more powerfully than words ever could. Noble silence also provides a refuge in the midst of the overwhelming pace of modern life. In a world of constant input, unending opinion, and relentless stimulation, genuine silence becomes a rare and precious sanctuary. These moments of quiet are like small clearings in a dense forest, openings where you can pause, breathe, and reconnect with what is essential. By returning regularly to these inner clearings, you gradually carry their stillness with you. Even when surrounded by noise and chaos, you develop what could be called portable peace, the ability to access inner quiet in any situation, no matter how loud or demanding the outer world may be. This is not about detachment or withdrawing from life, nor is it about being checked out or indifferent. Instead, it is about learning to be so deeply present that you are no longer constantly reacting to the surface-level disturbances of experience. The most profound teaching of noble silence is that peace does not depend on understanding everything. You do not need to have answers to every mystery in order to live with wisdom and compassion. You do not need to be able to neatly explain your spiritual experiences in order to trust their reality. What is truly needed is the courage to rest in mystery, to accept the limits of conceptual knowledge, and to place trust in the deeper intelligence that moves beyond the thinking mind. This intelligence is not carried in words. It expresses itself in presence, in the natural unfolding of appropriate action, in spontaneous gestures of compassion, and in sudden flashes of clarity that appear precisely when you are not struggling to manufacture them. This is why, when words inevitably fail, as they always do when one comes near the deepest questions of existence, you need not view this as a weakness or a loss. Rather, it is an invitation into another mode of knowing. It is a knowing that is direct, immediate, intimate, and more alive than anything contextual thought could ever provide. It is within this silence that you may begin to sense what the teacher in the auditorium was pointing toward. A wisdom that is utterly real, without needing to be spoken, an understanding that requires no explanation to transform your life, and a peace that is always available when you stop demanding that it declare itself in words. In that stillness, you recognize that truth is not diminished by its lack of articulation. It is, in fact, made more complete. After all the seeking, all the analysis, and all the attempts to dissect your patterns and engineer your transformation, you may find yourself in a familiar and frustrating place, swinging back and forth between extremes. One day, you are fiercely committed to change, meditating for hours, devouring spiritual texts, and examining every thought and emotion with relentless scrutiny. The next day, drained by the sheer weight of that effort, you collapse into the opposite pole, abandoning every practice and falling back into old habits as though nothing mattered at all. Perhaps your extremes take different forms. You might swing between harsh self-criticism and the recognition that such criticism is unhelpful, only to overcorrect by avoiding any honest self-reflection whatsoever. Or you might find yourself moving between the impulse to control every detail of your life, and when that control becomes unbearable, surrendering into a kind of apathetic drift with no conscious direction. This exhausting oscillation between opposites is so widespread and deeply human that the Buddha made it the very foundation of his teaching on the middle way. Yet the middle way is not what many assume it to be. The middle way is not a lukewarm compromise between extremes, nor is it about settling for mediocrity or adopting the posture of spiritual fence-sitting where you avoid committing to any real position. It is something far more dynamic, alive, and practical. The middle way is the art of balance, not as a fixed point you cling to, but as a fluid, responsive dance with whatever life presents. It is about learning to move skillfully between extremes without being imprisoned by either one. The Buddha himself discovered this principle through his personal journey with extremes. Before his awakening, he lived the life of a pampered prince, surrounded by every luxury, indulging in comfort, pleasure, and distraction. Yet this life of indulgence left him hollow and unfulfilled. Seeking truth, he swung to the opposite pole, embracing such severe asceticism that he nearly starved himself to death. It was only when he abandoned both of these extremes that awakening became possible. He later described this discovery in clear terms. Avoiding these two extremes, the middle way gives vision, gives knowledge, and leads to calm, to insight, to enlightenment. The middle way was not a theory he formulated, but a lived realization of how to meet each moment, not with automatic reactivity, but with the clarity of an appropriate response. When understood in this light, the middle way reveals itself as neither forcing nor giving up. It changes how you engage with every area of your life. In spiritual practice, for example, it means you do not have to choose between the relentless drive of aggressive self-improvement and the stagnation of passive resignation. You can walk a path of active growth without violence toward yourself. You can work with your patterns steadily and consistently, but without the frantic urgency that so often sabotages genuine transformation. Take meditation as an example. The forcing approach looks like sitting for hours trying to crush every thought into silence, becoming frustrated when the mind wanders, and harshly judging yourself for not being more focused. On the other hand, the giving up approach is deciding that meditation simply is not for you, dismissing the practice because your mind feels too restless, or because you believe you are incapable. The middle way approach, however, is gentler and wiser. It recognizes meditation as a practice of tending a garden. You plant seeds with intention, water them with regularity, and remove weeds when you notice them, but you do not attempt to pull flowers out of the ground in order to force them to bloom more quickly. Nor do you abandon the garden entirely when some plants fail. Instead, you remain engaged with the natural rhythms of growth, nurturing what can flourish without demanding perfection. This principle becomes especially valuable when working with difficult emotions. At one extreme, the forcing impulse leads you to attempt to think your way out of sadness, analyzing it endlessly until you believe you have decoded its every layer, or pushing yourself with rigid expectations to get over it by a certain timeline. At the other extreme, giving up looks like drowning in the emotion completely, allowing yourself to be consumed by it, identifying with it as the entirety of who you are, or numbing and distracting yourself to avoid feeling it altogether. The middle way with difficult emotions can be understood as what we might call skillful feeling. It is neither the path of suppression, where emotions are pushed away or denied, nor the path of indulgence, where they overwhelm and consume you. Instead, it is the practice of feeling emotions fully, while holding them within a spacious awareness that allows perspective. You give the emotion room to move through you, but you do not mistake it for something permanent or defining about who you are. The feeling is honored, but it is not allowed to become your identity. There is an old story that illustrates this truth beautifully. In ancient Japan, there lived a master potter, renowned throughout the land for crafting vessels of extraordinary beauty and enduring strength. Students would journey across long distances, eager to sit at his feet and uncover the secret of his skill. Many believed they would be taught advanced techniques, rare glazes, or hidden methods passed down only to the most worthy apprentices. Yet when the time came to teach, the master would simply place a lump of clay in front of each student and say, "Show me how you would shape this into a bowl." The eager students, full of determination, would dive into the task with great enthusiasm. Some pressed and pounded the clay with fierce intensity, determined to quickly mold it into the form they envisioned. But their bowls would often crack under the relentless force or emerge thick, clumsy, and lacking the grace they had hoped for. Observing these failures, other students would attempt the opposite. They would approach the clay with such hesitation and gentleness that they barely touched it at all. Afraid to impose their will, their bowls never took shape, remaining formless lumps, too weak to hold even a single drop of water. The master observed patiently as student after student swung between these two extremes. When at last he took up the clay himself, his hands moved in a way that was neither forceful nor timid. At times his touch was firm, at times gentle, always perfectly attuned to what the clay was ready to receive. The clay has its own nature, he would say softly, as his fingers guided it into form. Too much force and you destroy its integrity. Too little and you fail to help it realize its potential. The art is in feeling what it needs moment by moment and responding accordingly. His bowls, simple yet profound, became masterpieces, not because he used hidden techniques or mystical formulas, but because he had learned to dance with the clay. He neither imposed his will violently nor abdicated responsibility. Instead, he moved with a balance of respect and guidance, creating in the space between forcing and surrender. This story carries within it the essence of the middle way and its application to personal transformation. You are both the potter and the clay in your own life. You require enough engagement to shape change, but not so much pressure that you fracture your spirit. You need gentleness to honor your natural rhythms, but not so much passivity that nothing ever grows or shifts. Real transformation happens in that subtle balance, where effort and surrender meet. Working with these extremes gently becomes less of a grand gesture and more of a daily practice. It is in the small moments, how you speak to yourself, how you allow feelings to pass through you, how you respond to setbacks, that you learn the art of skillful feeling. Over time, like the master potter, your hands learn the rhythm, and your life begins to take shape with a beauty and strength that cannot be forced and cannot emerge from neglect. When you notice yourself leaning toward the forcing extreme, pushing too hard, moving too fast, and demanding immediate results, you can consciously soften your approach. Softening does not mean becoming lazy or uncommitted. Rather, it is about discovering sustainable ways to maintain momentum without burning yourself out. Likewise, when you find yourself drifting toward the giving up extreme, avoiding responsibility, numbing out, or abandoning your intentions altogether, you can gently re-engage. Re-engagement does not mean being harsh or punishing yourself for the lapse. Instead, it means compassionately returning to what you know serves your well-being and reorienting yourself with kindness. The middle way begins to reveal itself clearly in the way you relate to your goals and ambitions. The forcing approach treats goals like battlefields to be conquered, where only sheer willpower guarantees victory. On the other hand, the giving up approach abandons goals altogether, either because they feel too overwhelming or because the very act of wanting something begins to seem unspiritual or meaningless. Walking the middle path allows you to hold your goals lightly. You can strive toward what you want while remaining open to the possibility that the path may unfold differently than you imagined. You can stay committed to your vision while practicing flexibility about timing, methods, and outcome. In this way, you can pursue meaningful achievements without turning them into the sole measure of your worth. In relationships, the middle way prevents you from swinging between the extremes of complete merger and rigid independence. You do not have to lose yourself in others to experience intimacy, nor do you have to guard yourself through isolation in order to stay safe. The middle way offers another option. You can be close while maintaining individuality, vulnerable while upholding appropriate boundaries, and generous while still honoring your own needs. This balance allows relationships to be nurturing and expansive without dissolving your sense of self. The same principle applies when dealing with criticism or feedback. The defensive extreme reacts by rejecting anything that challenges the self-image, becoming angry or wounded whenever someone points out a mistake or suggests a new direction. The self-attacking extreme, however, immediately accepts all criticism as absolute truth, concluding that any negative comment must be evidence of deep personal flaw. The middle way is to listen with openness, neither dismissing nor swallowing feedback whole. You can consider carefully whether there is something useful in what you are hearing while maintaining discernment about what applies and what does not. Criticism becomes information to work with rather than a verdict on your worth as a human being. This same wisdom also transforms how you approach discipline and self-care. The forcing approach treats the body and mind as machines that must deliver consistent performance regardless of circumstances. You might pressure yourself to exercise while sick, demand the same productivity level despite exhaustion, or expect unwavering emotional stability every day. The giving up approach, however, rejects all structure as a form of oppression. In this mode, you might avoid exercise because it feels like pressure, abandon healthy eating because it seems too tutoring, or resist schedules altogether in the name of freedom. The middle way recognizes that authentic self-care requires both structure and flexibility. There is value in discipline and routine, but also in honoring your natural rhythms, resting when needed, and adjusting to life's changing demands. You can maintain routines that nurture your well-being while allowing them to adapt to life's shifting circumstances. You can create boundaries that protect your energy, yet remain open and responsive to genuine needs and opportunities that call for your presence. You can embody discipline without falling into rigidity and welcome spontaneity without descending into chaos. This balanced approach becomes especially vital when addressing mental and emotional health. On one side, the forcing extreme may manifest as trying to positive think your way out of depression, suppressing anxiety by filling every moment with busyness, or demanding that healing unfold according to some strict and predetermined timeline. On the other side, the giving up extreme may look like fully identifying with your mental health struggles, avoiding any activity that could lift your mood, or using your challenges as justification to withdraw from all responsibility. The middle way recognizes that mental health is shaped by both factors within your influence and those far beyond your control. You can support yourself with therapy, medication, lifestyle adjustments, or spiritual practices, while at the same time accepting that healing takes time and rarely moves in a neat, linear fashion. This perspective allows you to work constructively with your struggles without letting them become the defining feature of your identity. In your spiritual journey, the middle way prevents the pendulum from swinging between spiritual materialism and spiritual nihilism. You are not required to choose between obsessively chasing profound experiences and insights, or cynically dismissing all spiritual seeking as delusional and self-indulgent. Instead, you can engage wholeheartedly with the teachings and practices that genuinely deepen your awakening, while maintaining a healthy skepticism toward exaggerated claims or unhealthy community. The middle way also reshapes how you view your own progress. The forcing approach measures every step against some imagined ideal, leaving you frustrated whenever growth is slow, uneven, or interrupted. In this mindset, each setback becomes further evidence of failure. The giving up approach, on the other hand, avoids honest reflection entirely. It denies the possibility of meaningful change or hides behind spiritual slogans such as "everything is perfect as it is," to justify remaining stuck in harmful patterns. By contrast, the middle way invites honest assessment, tempered by compassion. You can look clearly at where you stand, acknowledge your progress without clinging to it, and learn from your mistakes, without turning them into weapons of self-attack. You can remain devoted to growth without making it a heavy burden to carry. This balanced outlook helps you see that while you are not perfect, you are not fundamentally broken either. Perhaps most importantly, the middle way teaches that balance is not a static destination to be reached and maintained forever. Balance is a living process, one of constant micro-adjustments, much like riding a bicycle or walking a tightrope. You are always shifting slightly, leaning a little one way or another in response to the changing conditions of your life. When understood in this way, balance no longer becomes a pressure-filled pursuit of some flawless state of being. Instead, it reveals itself as a dynamic, ongoing rhythm where presence and responsiveness matter far more than perfection or permanence. Instead, what develops through practice is something we might call balanced responsiveness, the subtle ability to sense when you are leaning toward an extreme and to gently adjust course before swinging too far. There are days when discipline and structure are exactly what you need, a steady framework to channel your energy and sharpen your focus. Yet there are other days when rest, spaciousness, and flexibility are what truly serve your well-being. At times, the wisest step is to push yourself just beyond your comfort zone to expand your capacity. At other times, wisdom lies in honoring your limits, slowing down, and scaling back. The middle way is not about finding one perfect formula and applying it rigidly to every situation. Rather, it is about cultivating the discernment to recognize what each unique moment calls for and responding appropriately. When you live from this middle way, you begin to loosen the grip of reactivity in the face of life's inevitable fluctuations. You no longer panic when difficulties arise because you understand that extremes are always temporary. You no longer cling desperately to peak experiences because you see clearly that all states, no matter how exhilarating, will eventually pass. This perspective creates a deeper kind of stability, an inner rootedness that can bend and sway with changing conditions without snapping under pressure. In this sense, the middle way becomes a natural remedy, a release from the exhausting pendulum of extremes, a freedom to respond with fresh awareness instead of falling into habitual reaction. Living in this balance frees you to embrace your humanity more fully. You no longer demand impossible perfection of yourself, nor do you settle for the dull fog of unconscious living. Like the master potter, you learn to feel into the texture of each moment, sensing whether it asks for firmness or softness, effort or ease, engagement or letting go. The difference lies not in the external form of the response, but in its source, arising from presence rather than compulsion, from wisdom rather than reactivity. The middle way never guarantees that life will become effortless, nor does it shield you from moments of confusion or uncertainty, but it offers something even more precious, the capacity to meet whatever life presents with an appropriate response rather than an automatic extreme. It is within this capacity that a quiet peace begins to emerge, a peace not dependent on circumstances aligning perfectly. There is a strength that doesn't need to force its way forward, and a wisdom that arises naturally from staying open to the truth of each unfolding moment. This is the promise of the middle way, not the end of challenge, but the birth of resilience and the discovery of a freedom rooted in presence. Change as friend, not enemy. There is a belief your mind has been whispering to you for as long as you can remember, a lie so persistent and convincing that it often passes unnoticed. It is the promise that somewhere, somehow, there exists a state, a situation, a relationship, or even a version of yourself that will remain stable, fixed, and unchanging. This is not usually a conscious belief. You know intellectually that everything shifts and transforms. You have witnessed the seasons turn, watched loved ones grow older, felt your own body and mind change year after year. Yet beneath that intellectual knowledge, a deeper part of you continues to reach for permanence, to cling to the hope that something will finally last, to resist the fundamental impermanence woven into the fabric of existence itself. To truly understand why this illusion of permanence has such a hold, you need to look more closely at how your survival instincts shape perception. The drive to secure stability, to preserve what feels safe, and to resist change is deeply wired into your nervous system. It is not simply a thought, but a reflex, an ingrained pattern born from the mind's desire to protect you. And yet, the very instinct that once kept our ancestors alive in a world of uncertainty now often blinds us to the truth that freedom lies not in resisting change, but in learning how to flow with it. Your brain evolved with one overriding priority: to keep you alive in a dangerous and unpredictable world. One of its most effective survival strategies is to construct a sense of a stable, continuous self moving through a familiar and predictable environment. This mental framework is enormously useful for basic functioning. It allows you to navigate life, make decisions, and build relationships. Yet, the very mechanism that helps you survive becomes a source of deep suffering when you begin to mistake it for reality itself. The truth is that the person you were yesterday is not identical to the person you are today. Billions of cells in your body have died and been replaced. Thoughts that seemed pressing yesterday may no longer be present. Emotions that felt overwhelming have shifted into something else. Your understanding of life has grown, however subtly. Even your memories of yesterday have been reshaped slightly in the act of recalling them, because every act of remembering is also an act of reconstruction. The sense of continuity you feel is real, but it is not the solidity of a rock. It is more like the flowing presence of a river. A river appears continuous, yet the water within it is never the same, from one moment to the next. Realizing this truth can feel unsettling at first. If nothing is permanent, then what can you truly rely on? If you are constantly changing, then who are you really? These questions can stir unease, but as you begin to soften into the reality of impermanence rather than resist it, something remarkable unfolds. The exhausting effort to hold everything together begins to loosen its grip. The fear of losing what you cherish slowly transforms into a deeper appreciation for what is present right now. Life itself begins to feel less like a battle to preserve and more like a dance to participate in. Working with change becomes less about resistance and more about learning to ride its waves. Consider what happens when you are standing in the ocean as a large wave approaches. If you brace rigidly, insisting on holding your exact position, the wave will inevitably knock you down, tumbling you around until you are left gasping for air. But if you dive into the wave or allow it to lift you, you move with its energy instead of being overwhelmed by it. The waves of change in your life function in exactly the same way. When unexpected challenges arise, when relationships shift in ways you did not anticipate, when carefully laid plans suddenly fall apart, you face a choice. You can exhaust yourself by struggling to hold on to what once was, or you can meet change with fluidity, moving with the current while maintaining your inner center. Maria discovered this truth when her company underwent a major restructuring. At first, she resisted with all her strength, consumed by anxiety and sleepless nights as she tried to predict outcomes and control what was beyond her influence. The more she clung to certainty, the more depleted and fearful she became. Then, one morning, as she walked by a river on her way to work, something caught her attention. She noticed how the water moved around obstacles in its path. It did not fight against the rocks or rail against their presence. It flowed around them with patience, sometimes creating eddies, sometimes carving new channels, but always moving forward. Its journey was never in a straight line, but its progress was undeniable. That simple observation changed the way Maria faced her uncertainty. Instead of exhausting herself resisting the restructuring, she began to ask a new question. How can I flow with this change while remaining true to my values and goals? With that shift, her energy redirected toward what was actually within her control, her skills, her relationships, and her responses to whatever unfolded. When the restructuring process was finally complete, her position had indeed changed in significant ways. Yet she found herself meeting the new reality, not with bitterness or fear, but with resilience and openness, because she had learned to move like the river instead of clinging like a rock. But instead of experiencing this as a defeat, she realized that her new role actually aligned more closely with her true interests and strengths. The very change she had feared and resisted ended up opening doors she never could have imagined before. This leads us to one of the most practical ways to understand impermanence, developing a conscious practice of letting go. Now, this doesn't mean becoming passive, careless, or indifferent about life. Instead, it means learning to hold your preferences, plans, and attachments with a light enough touch that you remain flexible when circumstances inevitably shift. To explore this, try a simple exercise right now. Bring to mind something you've been holding on to very tightly. It could be a grudge against someone who hurt you, an expectation about how your life should look, or even an outdated version of yourself that no longer fits who you are becoming. Picture yourself holding this thing in your hands like a small bird. Notice the effort required to keep your grip so tight that the bird cannot escape. Feel the tension in your fingers, the strain in your arms, and the constant vigilance it takes to maintain control. Now imagine slowly loosening your grip, gently opening your hands. The bird may fly away, or it may decide to stay, but either way, your hands are now free. This is the essence of letting go. It is not about pushing something away, rejecting it, or pretending it doesn't matter. Instead, it's about releasing the tight hold, allowing things to be as they are, rather than forcing them to match what you want them to be. It's about creating room for natural change to unfold, instead of trying to control or demand specific outcomes. There is an ancient story that illustrates this wisdom beautifully. Long ago, a young woman lived in a village beside a great river that had flowed through the valley for thousands of years. Each day she would sit on the riverbank, watching the water rush by, carrying with it leaves, branches, and sometimes even larger pieces of debris from upstream. She loved the river dearly, but over time she grew increasingly distressed by its constant movement. "Why can't you stay still?" she would cry to the flowing water. "Why must you always carry things away and bring new things I do not want?" One day, in her frustration, she decided to build a small dam across a narrow part of the river, hoping to make the water stay in one place. At first it seemed to work. The water pooled behind her dam, forming a calm, predictable surface that delighted her. For the first time, she felt she had succeeded in controlling the river, but within just a few days, she noticed the water was turning stagnant. Algae began to form, insects bred in the still pool, and a foul smell arose from the stagnant water. Downstream, the riverbed began to dry up, harming the plants and animals that depended on the flowing current. Finally realizing the consequences of her actions, the woman dismantled her dam and allowed the river to flow freely once again. As she watched the water resume its natural movement, the woman began to understand something profound. The river's beauty did not exist in spite of its constant change. It existed because of it. The flowing water kept itself fresh and clean precisely through movement. It nourished everything along its banks because it never stayed in one place. Over time, its persistent yet gentle flow carved magnificent canyons and created fertile valleys. Its strength did not come from being still, but from embracing its very essence as movement and flow. I have been asking the wrong question, the woman realized. Instead of asking, why can't you stay still? I should be asking, what are you trying to teach me about how to live? From that day forward, she carried this insight into her own life. When changes came, as they always did, she practiced flowing with them, just as the river flowed effortlessly around rocks. When she faced losses, she allowed herself to grieve, but also remained open to whatever new experiences might eventually arise. When her own thoughts and emotions shifted, she learned to witness them with the same acceptance she had cultivated toward the river's movement. This story reveals something revolutionary about finding peace in motion. Many people believe peace requires stillness, that tranquility can only exist in unchanging conditions. Yet the river teaches that true peace is possible, even within movement, that serenity can be present in the midst of constant change. The key lies in learning to identify with the awareness that observes change, rather than with the specific things that are changing. Your thoughts will change, but the awareness that notices them remains steady. Your emotions will shift, but the presence that experiences them is constant. Your circumstances will transform, yet the consciousness that lives through them is like vast, open space, able to hold everything without being disturbed by any of it. Making this shift in identification does not happen all at once. It is cultivated through practice, by continually observing what comes and goes, and what always remains. During meditation, you may notice how thoughts arise and dissolve, while awareness remains unchanged. In daily life, you might see how roles, responsibilities, and situations shift, yet the essential you that carries them out endures. Understanding impermanence also reshapes how you move through difficult times. When you are suffering, the reminder that this too shall pass is not just a comforting phrase, but a direct reflection of reality. No emotional state, no matter how overwhelming, is permanent. No situation, no matter how stuck it seems, lasts forever. This truth does not deny the reality of pain when it arises, but it does place that pain in a larger perspective that makes it more bearable. You can feel the full weight of grief while also knowing it will eventually transform. You can experience anxiety while trusting it will shift over time. You can meet anger fully while remembering it is only a temporary weather pattern passing through the vast sky of your awareness. Equally important, understanding impermanence deepens your capacity to appreciate joy and ease. You can savor good times without clinging to them desperately, knowing that they too are part of life's natural flow. When you are experiencing joy, love, or success, you can be fully present with these moments without the hidden anxiety of trying to make them permanent. You can watch a beautiful sunset without feeling sad that it is ending. You can love someone deeply without demanding guarantees about the future. You can celebrate accomplishments without attaching your self-worth to them. This quality of non-clinging appreciation may be the greatest gift that accepting impermanence offers. By releasing the urge to freeze the good moments, you allow yourself to experience them more completely. By letting go of the fear of losing what you love, you give yourself permission to love more freely. By recognizing that everything changes, you can finally be present with what exists right now, unburdened by the mental noise of trying to make it last forever. The practice of flowing with impermanence also cultivates resilience in a unique and transformative way. Instead of resisting change, you build flexibility. Instead of creating rigid structures that may shatter under pressure, you learn the art of bending and adapting. Like the river that carves its way through mountains, not with force but through steady, persistent flow, you too learn how to meet obstacles with responsiveness rather than resistance. This kind of resilience becomes an invaluable ally in every part of your life. In relationships, it allows you to love deeply, while also granting others the freedom to grow and change. In your work, it helps you stay dedicated to your goals while remaining flexible with timing and methods. In your personal growth, it empowers you to strive for positive change, while also embracing compassion for yourself when you fall back into old habits. Perhaps most importantly, embracing impermanence liberates you from the exhausting burden of trying to control life itself. You can still set intentions, make plans, and work toward meaningful goals, but you hold them lightly, knowing that outcomes are shaped by countless factors beyond your control. This shift does not make you passive, it makes you responsive. It does not make you detached, it makes you wise. When you stop resisting the river of change and learn to move with its current, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see that the movement you once feared is actually carrying you toward new experiences, deeper understanding, and unexpected growth, gifts you never could have orchestrated on your own. You realize that the very changes you resisted were often the ones that delivered exactly what you needed. And even when they did not bring what you wanted, you recognize that the river of impermanence never flows randomly. It follows patterns shaped by natural laws your mind cannot always comprehend, but your heart can learn to trust. When you align yourself with this flow instead of struggling against it, you discover that you are not simply moving through life. You are moving with life, participating in its vast, ever-changing dance. Within that dance, you find a peace that does not depend on circumstances remaining the same, a joy that asks for no guarantees, and a love that grows stronger precisely because it does not try to control or possess. In this way, you become like the river itself, ever moving, ever changing, ever flowing towards something greater than what has come before. Non-self as ultimate freedom. After all the work of understanding your patterns, discovering your authentic self, and learning how to navigate life's many challenges, you might be surprised to learn that Buddhism ultimately points to something even more liberating. It is the recognition that the solid, separate self you have been trying so hard to improve might not actually be as real as you believe. This is not a denial of your existence or the importance of your experiences. Rather, it is an invitation into the most profound kind of freedom imaginable, the freedom from the prison of having to be someone in particular. The teaching of non-self, or anatta in Sanskrit, is perhaps one of the most misunderstood concepts in Buddhism. It does not mean that you do not exist, that your feelings are irrelevant, or that you should retreat into passivity and detachment from life. Instead, it reveals that the boundaries you have drawn around yourself, the story you tell about who you are, and the identity you tirelessly defend and maintain are all far more fluid, flexible, and constructed than they first appear. To understand what it means to move beyond the prison of identity, it helps to notice just how much energy goes into maintaining the sense of being a consistent somebody. Even now, as you read or listen to these words, part of your mind is unconsciously monitoring whether what you are taking in aligns with your self-image. You may find yourself asking, am I the kind of person who cares about spiritual teachings? Do I see myself as someone who makes time for reflection? Do these ideas fit with what I already believe about myself? This inner editor is always at work, filtering each experience through the rigid lens of identity. Consider the way this plays out in everyday life. You tell yourself, I am not the kind of person who gets angry, so you suppress irritation when it arises. You hold the belief, I am someone who always has it together, so you hide moments of confusion or vulnerability. Or perhaps you identify with the idea, I am not creative, and so you shy away from artistic pursuits altogether. These self-imposed definitions create invisible walls around your experience, confining your life within narrow boundaries. This natural state of unself-conscious presence is what you are beneath all the stories and identities. It is not that you become nobody, it is that you become free to be anybody, or more precisely, free to respond to each moment, without the restriction of needing to be somebody fixed and specific. You can approach this as a practical experiment. Try seeing identity as a costume that you can put on and take off. Tomorrow, spend a few hours consciously playing with different aspects of your personality. If you usually see yourself as serious, allow yourself to be playful. If you typically identify as introverted, experiment with being more outgoing. By loosening your grip on identity in this way, you begin to taste the freedom that non-self makes possible. If you think of yourself as practical, try allowing a little whimsy into your day. You may be surprised to discover how naturally these seemingly foreign qualities emerge when you are not busy defending against them. The playfulness was always within you, simply hidden behind the serious identity. The ease in social settings was already present beneath the label of being introverted. The creativity was quietly available under the mask of being strictly practical. These were never fake performances. They were authentic parts of you that your fixed self-concept had been filtering out of your awareness. This realization points to something revolutionary. You contain multitudes. The personality you habitually think of as you is just one possible arrangement of awareness, like a single outfit chosen from a vast wardrobe. Once you truly see this, you become free to choose how to show up in each moment, based not on what is consistent with your self-image, but on what the situation genuinely requires. Yet there is something even deeper than this flexibility of identity. Beyond all the shifting expressions of self lies the awareness that watches them. This consciousness is present whether you are serious or playful, introverted or outgoing. Unlike personality traits, awareness itself has no fixed characteristics. It is more like space, everywhere, containing everything, yet never limited by what it holds. Learning to identify with this awareness rather than with the shifting content of awareness is at the very heart of the teaching of non-self. Thoughts rise and fall, but the awareness that notices them remains steady. Emotions surge and fade, but the presence that feels them does not change. Roles and responsibilities evolve, but the consciousness that experiences them is unshakable. There is a story that illustrates this truth with great clarity. A young monk once struggled with the teaching of non-self. If there is no self, he asked his teacher, then who is asking this question? Who is trying to understand? Who will become enlightened? In response, the teacher led him to a room filled with mirrors of many shapes and sizes. Some mirrors were flat and clear, reflecting images perfectly. Others were curved or tinted, producing distorted or colored reflections. Still, others were cracked, breaking the reflections into fragments. Look carefully around this room, the teacher instructed. How many moons do you see? So pause now. Take a slow breath. Feel the ground beneath your feet. Notice that you are still here, still breathing, still capable of presence. That is not nothing. That is everything. You are already home.